Hey everyone! As you're sitting there in your air-conditioned comfort, scrolling through your phone without a care in the world, I want you to imagine stepping back 40,000 years into a world so merciless that it makes your worst day feel like a vacation. Picture this: no electricity, no supermarkets, no emergency rooms, no technology to shield you from the brutal reality that everything in nature is actively trying to end your existence. Welcome to the Stone Age, where winter wasn't just cold weather. It was an annual apocalypse that wiped out entire bloodlines. So before we journey into this prehistoric nightmare, go ahead and hit that like button if you're ready to have your modern sensibilities completely shattered. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what's keeping you cool right now, because it's always incredible to see who's willing to join me as we explore humanity's most desperate chapters. Maybe grab a cold drink, crank up that AC, and settle into your comfortable chair, because once you understand what our ancestors endured, you'll never take summer comfort for granted again. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you were transported back to the Stone Age tomorrow, you wouldn't last a week. Not because you're weak or stupid, but because you're soft. Your ancestors weren't just tough, they were evolutionary miracles wrapped in animal skins and held together by pure desperation. They survived because they had to, and most of them didn't. We've romanticized the Stone Age into some kind of noble savage fantasy. Cavemen sitting around fires, painting on walls, living in harmony with nature. But strip away the museum displays and documentary narration, and you're left with a reality so harsh that it makes modern warfare look civilized. Your average Stone Age winter killed more people than most plagues. Cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a serial killer that never took a day off. Think about your morning routine. You wake up in a climate-controlled room, stumble to a heated bathroom, grab coffee from a machine that works with the push of a button, and check your phone for weather updates. Your Stone Age equivalent? Wake up on frozen ground hoping the fire didn't die overnight, because if it did, you probably died with it. No weather app, no indoor plumbing, no coffee, and definitely no phone to call for help when everything goes wrong, which it will. The average human today consumes about 2,000 calories per day while sitting in air-conditioned offices. Stone Age humans needed 3,000 and 4,000 calories just to survive winter, and they had to hunt, gather, or fight for every single one. Miss a meal? That's not hunger, that's the beginning of the end. Miss 3 meals? Welcome to starvation, where your body starts eating itself to stay alive. But calories were just one problem. You also had to avoid becoming calories for something else. Remember, humans weren't the apex predators we pretend to be today. We were prey, cave bears that could crush your skull with a casual swat, saber-toothed cats that could rip your throat out before you knew they were there, dire wolves that hunted in packs and saw humans as convenient walking meals, and that's just the megafauna. The microscopic world was equally eager to kill you, with bacteria, parasites, and viruses that your immune system had never encountered. Your fellow humans weren't much safer. Resources were limited, territories were fought over with stone axes and wooden spears, and tribal politics were settled with violence. Sharing was a luxury few could afford. If you were injured, elderly, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, your own tribe might abandon you to die. Because harsh as it sounds, one less mouth to feed meant everyone else had a slightly better chance of seeing spring. The psychological toll was perhaps the cruelest aspect of all. Imagine the constant stress of never knowing if you'd wake up tomorrow. Every sound in the night could be death approaching. Every empty stomach could be the beginning of your final fast. Every cough could be your last. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a predator that lasted 16 hours a day during winter. Modern humans have anxiety disorders from checking social media. Stone Age humans lived with genuine, life-threatening terror as their daily reality. And they didn't have therapy, medication, or support groups. They had each other, fire, and the desperate hope that tomorrow might be slightly less deadly than today. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. Some of them made it. Not many, but enough. Every single person reading this right now is descended from Stone Age survivors. Your DNA carries the genetic memory of people who looked death in the face every single day and somehow found a way to keep going. They weren't heroes in the Hollywood sense. They were ordinary people doing extraordinary things because the alternative was extinction. Tonight we're going to explore why you wouldn't last a day in their world. Not to mock your modern softness, but to honour their incredible resilience. Because understanding how close humanity came to extinction helps us appreciate how miraculous our survival really is. So grab that blanket a little tighter and let's begin our journey into the killing cold of the Stone Age winter. Your ancestors survived this nightmare so you could complain about your Wi-Fi being slow. The least we can do is remember what they went through. Welcome to the Ice Age, where the air doesn't just chill your bones, it attacks them. Imagine standing in an open field, the wind slicing through whatever pathetic layers you've managed to cobble together, temperatures hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's on a good day. You're shivering already, but this isn't some temporary discomfort before you retreat to your heated home. This is your life now. This is survival. Let's be brutally honest. The average temperature during the last ice age was 10 to 15 degrees colder than today's climate. That doesn't sound dramatic until you realise what it means. Streams freeze solid, not just on the surface. The ground hardens like concrete. Your breath doesn't just become visible, it crystallises in your nostrils with every inhale. And there's no weather app, no forecast, no warning system to tell you when the next blizzard will sweep through and bury everything in 3 feet of snow. It just comes, and you'd better be ready. Your cotton t-shirt? Useless. That polyester jacket? A joke. Modern fabrics are designed for modern convenience, not survival. They get wet, they stay wet, and in the Stone Age, wet equals dead. Our ancestors wore animal hides not because they were fashionable, but because they were functional. Layered, wind-resistant, and when properly prepared, somewhat water-repellent. But you don't know how to prepare a hide, do you? You don't know how to scrape off the fat, remove the membrane and suck up the skin to make it pliable. You'd be wearing a rotting, stinking, stiff piece of dead animal that would crack in the cold and attract predators from miles away. Now let's talk about hypothermia, your new worst enemy. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in with subtle signs, slight confusion, fumbling fingers, slurred speech. Your body temperature drops from 98.6 degrees to 95 degrees. And you start shivering uncontrollably, your body's desperate attempt to generate heat. Below 91 degrees, shivering stops. Not because you're warming up, but because your body is giving up. Your organs are shutting down, your heart rate slows. Your breathing becomes shallow, and somewhere between 82 degrees and 86 degrees, your heart stops completely. The whole process can take as little as 30 minutes in wet conditions, half an hour between life and death. The sun is setting, you've been walking all day, your muscles ache, and now you need to rest. But the ground isn't your friend. It's a heat thief, a silent predator that will suck the warmth from your body while you sleep. Lie directly on the frozen earth, and you might not wake up. The cold ground conducts heat away from your body 30 times faster than cold air. In the Stone Age, this wasn't just uncomfortable, it was lethal. And then there's the wind. Modern meteorologists call it wind chill factor, but there was no term for it 40,000 years ago. Just the reality that moving air accelerates death. A 15 mph wind can make 30 degrees feel like 90 euros. Your exposed skin freezes faster. Your body loses heat more rapidly. Wind finds every gap in your clothing, every opening in your shelter. It doesn't just cool you down, it actively hunts the warmth your body desperately tries to preserve. Frostbite isn't just discomfort, it's your body sacrificing parts to save the whole. First, your extremities, fingers, toes, nose, ears, begin to tingle. That's your blood vessels constricting, prioritizing your core. The skin turns white, then waxy. Pain comes next, then numbness. Once you can't feel your fingers anymore, the damage is done. The tissue is freezing, cells rupturing as water inside them expands into ice crystals. When spring finally arrives, if you survive that long, those blackened digits will simply fall off. No surgery, no antibiotics, no physical therapy, just loss. Your body's shivering isn't just an annoying reaction. It's an emergency response, muscles contracting involuntarily to generate heat. But this survival mechanism comes with a terrible cost: calories. Shivering can increase your metabolic rate by 5 times, burning through your precious energy reserves like a wildfire through dry grass. In a world where your next meal is never guaranteed, every calorie matters. Shiver for too long and you're not just cold, you're starving yourself, creating a deadly spiral where the more you shiver, the weaker you become. and the weaker you become, the less able you are to find food or build shelter. You need fire, not as a comfort, not as a luxury, but as the thin line between life and death. Fire is warmth, protection, food preparation, water purification, and tool creation all in one dancing flame. But here's the brutal truth, you can't make one. Not really. Forget matches, forget lighters, forget that satisfying click of your gas stove. In the Stone Age, fire creation was an art form requiring years of practice. The bow drill method, spinning a wooden stick against a fireboard using a bow and sauce, looks simple in survival shows. It's not. It requires the perfect materials, wood of specific hardness, bone or stone sockets to reduce friction at the top, cordage strong enough to withstand the tension, tinder that's completely dry and properly prepared. Even for experts, success rates plummet in humid conditions. The hand drill is even more demanding, requiring calloused palms and forearms like steel to maintain the pressure and speed necessary for ember creation. Your soft, modern hands would be blistered and bleeding long before the wood started to smoke. And pressure flaking, and striking certain stones to create sparks demands specific materials rarely found in one location. Flint, chert or quartz struck against iron pyrite might throw a spark, but catching that momentary flash in precisely prepared tinder is like threading a needle in a hurricane. Even if you somehow created fire, your problems are just beginning. Dry wood in winter is rarer than warmth itself. Snow-covered branches, rain-soaked trunks, ice-glazed twigs. These don't burn, they hiss and smoke and steal your hope. Our ancestors stockpiled dry wood over months, protected it jealously, planned their camps around fuel sources. You didn't. You thought fire was easy because you've only ever had to push a button. And maintenance. Fire isn't a thing you create and forget. It's a hungry child demanding constant attention. Sleep too deeply and it dies. Collect too little wood and it dies. Build it poorly and it dies. Or worse, it spreads. The night is 14 hours long in winter. That's 14 hours of feeding flames, adjusting airflow, protecting sparks from wind and snow. Modern humans complain about missing a night's sleep for a crying baby. Try staying half awake for 5 months straight, knowing that if you fail, everyone dies before dawn. I'll just find a cave, you think, as if caves sit empty, welcoming, conveniently located along hiking trails. The reality, caves were premium real estate in the Ice Age, and you weren't the only one house hunting. Cave bears, 500-pound behemoths with territorial instincts, claimed the best shelters. Wolves denned in others. Neanderthals and early humans fought and died for the rest. A good cave was worth killing for, and against a clan of humans who've spent their entire lives learning to survive and fight, your chances are somewhere between 0 and none. So you'll build something with what? Your bare hands? Stone tools are the technology of the era. But napping, the art of shaping stone into cutting edges, isn't something you pick up in an afternoon. It requires understanding rock mechanics, having the proper hammerstones, and tolerating countless sliced fingers during the learning process. Without proper tools, you're trying to cut branches with glorified rocks, a task that transforms 30-minute jobs into day-long struggles. Let's say you manage to gather materials. Now you need to construct something that will actually keep you alive. A lean-to won't cut it in sub-freezing temperatures. You need insulation, layers of material that trap dead air and block wind. Moss, if you can find it under snow. Leaves, if any remain after autumn. Grass, if all of it's not frozen solid. These natural insulators must be collected by the armful hour after hour until you have enough to create walls thick enough to matter. Then there's the engineering challenge. Without rope, without nails, without experience, your shelter is a structural disaster waiting to happen. The first heavy snow might collapse it, crushing you in your sleep. Rain could soak through, leaving you wet and freezing. Wind might tear it apart piece by piece while you huddle inside, watching your survival chances disintegrate with each gust. Our ancestors built shelters that worked because they learned from the fatal mistakes of others. You have no such luxury. The most effective Ice Age shelters were semi-subterranean, dug partially into the ground to utilize the Earth's insulating properties, with frameworks of mammoth bones or wooden poles supporting roofs of hide, sod, and compacted plant material. These weren't improvised overnight accommodations. They were carefully planned, skillfully constructed survival machines built by people who understood that architectural failures meant death. Your modern intuition about shelter building isn't just insufficient, it's dangerously wrong. Even successful shelters weren't comfortable by any stretch of imagination. Smoke filled the interior because proper chimneys didn't exist, just holes that let out some smoke while also letting in cold air and precipitation. The ground was hard, the space cramped. Multiple humans pressed together, their body heat essential for survival. Privacy wasn't a concept when temperatures dropped below freezing. You slept touching others, smelling others, because isolation meant freezing to death before morning. The cold doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your discomfort or your modern sensibilities. Winter in the Stone Age wasn't something you endured for a weekend camping trip with the comfort of knowing your heated home awaited your return. It was an entity unto itself, a season of death that lasted half the year. A relentless pressure that shaped every decision, every moment, every desperate attempt to see another sunrise. This is just the beginning of your nightmare. The cold is your first enemy, but it's far from your last. Because even if you somehow solve the shelter problem, even if you miraculously create fire, even if you layer yourself in hides and furs, your stomach is already growling. And in the Stone Age winter, hunger isn't just discomfort, it's the next killer waiting to claim you. The cold doesn't just threaten your comfort, it rewrites the rules of existence. Every breath reminds you how thin the margin is between survival and freezing to death. Every shiver burns precious calories you cannot replace. Every night is a battle against the darkness, the wind, the silence of a world waiting for you to make a fatal mistake. Welcome to the Ice Age. The cold is just getting started. You've somehow survived the first freezing night. Maybe you found a shallow cave that wasn't already claimed by something with teeth. Maybe you scraped together enough dead branches to build a shelter that didn't immediately collapse. Maybe you even managed to create fire, though your bleeding hands and exhausted muscles suggest it wasn't exactly a casual achievement. Congratulations, now comes the real challenge. Finding food in a landscape that seems determined to starve you to death. Let's talk basic survival math. In freezing temperatures, your body burns calories like a furnace, up to 3,000 to 4,500 per day just to maintain core temperature. That's not optional. That's not a diet you can choose to skip. That's what stands between you and hypothermia. Every shiver, every trudge through snow, every moment spent gathering firewood drains your energy reserves. And unlike your comfortable modern life where hunger is a minor inconvenience before your next meal, Stone Age hunger is a countdown to death. Look around you. See all those edible plants? No, you don't, because they're dead or dormant. The lush berries, fruits and greens that might sustain you in summer are gone. Roots and tubers are locked beneath frozen ground harder than concrete. Tree bark contains some nutrients, but your digestive system isn't equipped to process it efficiently, and you'll spend more calories chewing it than you'll gain. The plant kingdom has largely abandoned you until spring. I'll just hunt, you say, with all the confidence of someone who has never actually hunted anything more challenging than a good deal online. Here's the brutal reality. Even experienced Stone Age hunters, with years of practice and intimate knowledge of animal behaviour, succeeded in only 10 to 20% of their hunting attempts. Some anthropologists suggest that in winter success rates dropped even lower. Every failed hunt wasn't just disappointment, it was precious calories expended with nothing to show for it. And you? You have no hunting skills. Zero. You can't track animals across snow and ice. You can't move silently through frozen underbrush. You can't read the subtle signs that indicate which direction a herd moved or how long ago they passed. You probably can't even recognize which tracks belong to which animals. Your predatory instincts have been thoroughly domesticated out of existence, replaced with skills like spreadsheet management and social media navigation. Impressive in your world, you should listen to this one. Let's imagine you decide to try hunting anyway. First problem, weapons. You need to transform raw materials into something that can kill at a distance, because getting close to an animal that outweighs you is a recipe for becoming the hunted rather than the hunter. A spear seems simplest, just a sharp stick, right? Wrong. An effective hunting spear needs perfect balance, a hardened point, and strength that won't shatter on impact. The wood must be straightened using controlled heat. a process requiring fire management skills you don't possess. The point must be precisely shaped from stone, bone, or antler, materials you don't know how to work. Bows are even more complex. The wood must have just the right flexibility. The string must be made from sinew, plant fibres, or gut, all requiring specialised preparation. Arrows need fletchings for stability, points for penetration, and perfect straightness for accuracy. Each component demands hours of careful crafting. In the Stone Age, children began learning these skills before they could walk, their tiny hands mimicking adult movements until muscle memory took over. You have no such foundation. Even if you somehow create a functional weapon, tracking is its own specialised art form. Snow makes tracks obvious, but reading them accurately is far from simple. How fresh are they? Which direction is the animal moving? Is it healthy or wounded? Alone or in a group? Stone Age hunters could answer these questions at a glance. You might as well be trying to read hieroglyphics. And tracking means walking, sometimes for days, burning calories you can't afford to lose on a gamble that will probably fail. Let's say through some miracle you actually find an animal. Perhaps a deer foraging for bark or a wild pig rooting beneath the snow. Now comes the hardest part. Getting close enough for a kill shot without being detected. Animals in winter are already on high alert, their survival depending on detecting predators. Their sense of smell is thousands of times more acute than yours. Their hearing can pick up the sound of snow compressing beneath your feet from hundreds of yards away. And you smell like a foreign predator. You move with all the grace of a drunk elephant, and you're probably breathing heavily from exertion. But let's continue this fantasy. Somehow, against all odds, you manage to get within range. You have one shot. One miss and your prey bolts, taking your invested calories with it. Your hands are trembling from cold and hunger. Your muscles are weakened from exertion. The wind is playing tricks with your aim. And unlike target practice at a shooting range, this target is moving alert and has evolved specifically to avoid being hit by predators. Even a successful hit doesn't guarantee a meal. Many wounded animals can run for miles before succumbing, forcing you to track blood trails across difficult terrain. Reach the fallen animal too late and other predators may have already claimed your prize. And if you do manage to be first, you're now faced with a new problem. A carcass weighing potentially hundreds of pounds that needs to be field dressed before it freezes solid or the meat spoils. Do you know how to gut an animal without puncturing its intestines and contaminating the meat? Can you identify which organs are edible and which are toxic? Do you know which parts contain the most calories and should be prioritised? With hunting proving difficult or impossible, you might turn to gathering, searching for anything edible that winter hasn't claimed. But winter has claimed almost everything, and what remains is a dangerous gamble for the inexperienced. Those red berries poking through the snow? They might be rose hips, rich in vitamin C, or they might be yew berries, containing toxins that will stop your heart. That mushroom growing on a tree trunk, potentially nutritious or potentially your last meal on Earth. Plant identification is a lifetime study, not something you can improvise when starving. Our ancestors carried thousands of data points in their memories. Which plants are edible, which parts can be eaten, which must be processed to remove toxins, which look similar but will kill you. Modern humans often struggle to identify more than 5 wild plants correctly. In a forested environment, you're walking past potential food and potential poison, unable to distinguish between them. The most reliable winter food sources, roots and tubers, are nearly impossible to access. The ground is frozen to the consistency of concrete. Without specialised digging tools and knowledge of where these underground treasures grow, you're literally scratching the surface of frozen earth while burning more calories than you could possibly recover. Some roots must also be processed to remove toxic compounds, knowledge passed down through generations that you simply don't have. Even if you spot a nut-bearing tree, you're competing with squirrels, birds, and other animals that have been stockpiling these calorie-dense prizes since autumn. The easy pickings disappeared months ago. What remains requires climbing trees with frozen branches, risking falls that could mean death in a world without emergency services. And many nuts, like acorns, contain bitter tannins that must be leached out through specific processing techniques you've never learned. Let's play out the most optimistic scenario. Somehow, against overwhelming odds, you've acquired food, perhaps a small animal or a handful of edible plants. Your troubles aren't over, they've just changed form. In the Stone Age, food storage wasn't a convenience, it was survival. Without refrigeration, meat begins to spoil within hours, especially if improperly dressed. Bacteria don't disappear in winter, they just work more slowly. You might think freezing temperatures would help preserve meat naturally, and sometimes they do, but fluctuating temperatures, body heat from the kill, and improper handling can still lead to spoilage. More importantly, leaving meat exposed to freeze means surrendering it to other predators. The scent of blood carries for miles in cold, clear air. Wolves, bears, foxes, and ravens will find your food cache faster than you can say, "I'm starving." And they won't politely take a portion, they'll take everything, leaving you with nothing but an empty stomach and wasted effort. Smoking meat preserves it, but requires a carefully controlled fire, producing the right kind of smoke for hours or days. Too hot and your food burns, too cool and bacteria continue to multiply. The process demands constant attention, specific types of wood, and a properly constructed smoking rack. It's a skill refined over generations, not something you can improvise successfully on your first try. Drying works in winter, but requires protection from scavengers and precise timing to prevent freezing before sufficient moisture has been removed. And both smoking and drying require cutting meat into thin strips, easy with a sharp steel knife, nearly impossible with the crude stone tools you might have managed to create. Salt is the most effective preservative, but natural salt deposits are rare and unevenly distributed across landscapes. Coastal areas might offer evaporated sea salt, but inland, you could go your entire life without finding a usable salt source. And without preservation, you're forced into a desperate cycle. Eat everything immediately, risking digestive issues from overconsumption, or watch your hard-won calories rot or get stolen. Let's face reality. Despite your best efforts, you're starving. Not the "I-skipped lunch" hunger of modern life, but true body-consuming starvation. Here's what happens to you over the next 4 weeks. A countdown to death that begins the moment your calorie expenditure consistently exceeds your intake. Week 1 brings constant hunger, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and obsessive thoughts about food. Your body is sending increasingly urgent signals that something is wrong. Headaches become your constant companion as your blood sugar levels fluctuate wildly. Physical tasks become noticeably more difficult. Even gathering firewood leaves you winded and weak. By week 2, your body is making hard choices about resource allocation. Non-essential functions begin shutting down. Your skin becomes dry and pale as blood flow to extremities decreases. Hair begins falling out. Wounds heal slowly or not at all. Most dramatically, your muscles begin to waste away as your body consumes its own tissues for energy. The resulting weakness creates a vicious cycle, Simon. You have less strength to hunt or gather, meaning even fewer calories come in. Week 3 is where the true horror begins. Your body fat is depleted, and cannibalization of muscle accelerates. Basic movements become exhausting. Your heart rate slows to conserve energy. Cognitive function decreases sharply. Decision-making becomes impaired, reaction times slow, and complex problem-solving becomes nearly impossible. These mental effects are particularly deadly in a survival situation where one poor choice can kill you. Your immune system is so compromised that minor infections become life-threatening. Internal organs begin to shrink. By week 4, organ failure begins in earnest. Your heart, already weakened, may develop arrhythmias. Your digestive system can no longer properly process what little food you might find. Severe edema may develop as protein levels in your blood drop too low to maintain normal fluid balance. Hallucinations are common as your brain struggles with inadequate glucose. Death comes from multiple system failure or from a secondary condition like infection that your body can no longer fight. Sometimes the heart simply stops. This isn't a dramatic Hollywood death. It's slow, painful, and undignified. You don't heroically sacrifice yourself in a blaze of glory. You simply weaken day by day until you can't get up anymore. Until gathering firewood becomes impossible. Until your fire dies because you can't feed it. Until the cold takes what little life starvation has left you. And here's the cruelest part. Unlike modern humans who might experience starvation only during extreme circumstances, Stone Age people face this spectre every winter. They prepared all year for these lean months, developing food storage technologies, specialized winter hunting techniques, and social sharing systems that distributed resources. They didn't just know starvation theoretically, They had seen it take their children, their elders, their friends in bad years. Their entire culture was built around preventing exactly the fate that you, with your supermarket expectations and microwave timeline, are almost certainly going to experience. The hunger doesn't just weaken your body, it consumes your mind. Every waking moment revolves around food, finding it, rationing it, dreaming about it. You'll find yourself staring at tree bark, wondering if this time the calories might be worth the effort. You'll follow animal tracks until exhaustion forces you to turn back. You'll lick frost from branches for the few molecules of moisture. And all the while, your body is consuming itself from the inside out, sacrificing tomorrow's survival for today's continuation. This is why winter was the killing season. This is why Stone Age grave sites show periodic evidence of nutritional stress. This is why entire genetic adaptations evolved around fat storage and efficient metabolism. In the modern world, starvation is a tragedy. In the Stone Age, it was a neighbour that visited every year, sometimes taking a few, sometimes taking many. And you never learned to preserve summer's abundance. You never developed the intuitive knowledge of which plants might still offer roots in winter. You never mastered the tracking skills to find mammals when they're scarce. Your body, accustomed to 3 meals a day plus snacks, has no reserves of knowledge or skill to draw upon when the hunger truly begins. So as your stomach cramps with emptiness, as your strength fades day by day, remember, hunger in the Stone Age wasn't just discomfort. It was the silent predator that killed more humans than violence, accidents, or disease combined. And unlike those other threats, you can't fight it, outrun it, or hide from it. It's already inside you, counting down. You've survived the cold, so far. You've managed to fend off starvation, barely. But as the weak winter sun dips below the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in deepening shades of blue, a sound freezes your blood faster than any chill ever could. A long, low howl echoing through the trees, and it's not alone. Other voices join the chorus, some higher, some deeper, all signalling the same terrifying message. The hunters have become active, and in the Stone Age food chain, you're not the apex predator you thought you were. You're just another source of walking meat. Let's introduce you to the real rulers of the Ice Age wilderness, predators that would make today's largest carnivores look like house pets. They're not just dangerous, they're perfectly evolved killing machines that have spent millennia adapting to exactly the conditions you're struggling to survive in. First, the cave bear. Forget the black bears or even grizzlies of today. Cave bears stood over 10 feet tall when rearing up, weighing between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds of muscle, claw and fury. Their jaws could crush bone like you'd snap a twig. While primarily plant eaters, they were territorial beyond imagination, especially when it came to the caves where they hibernated, the same caves you desperately need for shelter. Disturb one, and your life expectancy drops to minutes. Try to claim its cave and you might as well have signed your death certificate. Then there's the saber-toothed cat, not a tiger as often depicted, but a specialised predator with upper canines up to 8 inches long. These weren't just for show, they were precision instruments evolved specifically to puncture throats and sever arteries with a single bite. Saber-tooths hunted by ambush, their muscular build allowing them to take down prey much larger than themselves. You, with your slow reflexes and poor night vision, would be pathetically easy target. The first sign of attack wouldn't be a roar or a rustle in the bushes, it would be those teeth sinking into your neck, your life draining before you even registered the danger. Dire wolves make today's timber wolves look like puppies. 20% larger than modern wolves, weighing up to 175 pounds, with jaws that could crush mammoth bones. They hunted in packs of up to 30. Their endurance outmatched any humans. They could run prey to exhaustion over miles of terrain. Intelligence, coordination, relentlessness. These weren't just characteristics. They were weapons honed by evolution. And unlike modern wolves that generally avoid humans, dire wolves evolved alongside early hominids without learning to fear them. To them, you're not a dangerous predator to avoid, you're just slower, weaker prey. Perhaps most terrifying of all was the cave lion, up to 25% larger than modern African lions, adapted specifically for cold weather hunting, with thick fur that made them nearly invisible in winter twilight. Unlike their modern cousins, cave lions weren't just savanna hunters, they were perfectly comfortable stalking through forests and rocky terrain. Their prey drive was legendary. with fossil evidence showing they took down juvenile mammoths and woolly rhinoceros. Your puny frame wouldn't present even the slightest challenge. These aren't the only predators in your new neighbourhood. Short-faced bears, hyenas the size of lions, packs of dholes, wolverines. The Ice Age was an era of megafauna, where being big, strong and vicious was the evolutionary advantage. Modern humans have lived in an artificially safe environment for so long that we have forgotten what it means to be hunted. You're about to get a brutal reminder. As darkness claims the land, your disadvantages multiply exponentially. The human eye is pathetically ill-equipped for nocturnal survival. Your night vision is a joke compared to that of predators. A wolf can see movement in light 5 times dimmer than what you need. A big cat's eyes reflect available light through a specialized membrane, essentially giving them night vision goggles courtesy of evolution. Your pupils dilate uselessly, straining to make out shapes that predators see with crystal clarity. And it is not just vision. Your hearing might pick up that twig snap 50 feet away, but a wolf hears your heartbeat from 100 yards. Your nose might detect cooking meat, but a bear smells your day-old footprints. You're essentially blindfolded, earplugged, and sensory deprived compared to the creatures hunting you. This sensory disparity becomes a death sentence when you realise just how long night lasts in winter. 14 to 16 hours of darkness. That's 14 to 16 hours where you're at your most vulnerable while predators are at their most advantaged. Dawn doesn't come at a comfortable 6 a.m. It drags its feet until 8 or 9, and dusk arrives shockingly early, around 4 p.m. That's 2/3 of your day spent in a perpetual disadvantage every single day for months on end. Fire becomes your only reliable defense, the one advantage humans have over other predators. But fire is a double-edged sword. Yes, it keeps most predators at bay through their instinctive fear of flames, but it also announces your presence to every hungry creature within miles. "Here I am," it declares to the darkness. A soft, meaty human with no claws, no fangs, and nowhere to run. Fire doesn't solve your predator problem, it just changes its nature. And sleep? Forget the luxurious 8 hours you're accustomed to. Sleep in the Stone Age is a series of nervous naps, constantly interrupted by every rustle, crack and howl. Your brain never fully enters deep sleep because your survival depends on remaining partially alert. Night after night of this fragmented rest accumulates into a crushing sleep debt, slowing your reflexes, clouding your judgment, and making you even more vulnerable to both predators and mistakes. You stink, not metaphorically, literally, to the finely tuned olfactory systems of Ice Age predators. You're a walking billboard advertising fresh meat. Every step you take, every place you rest, every bodily function leaves behind an invisible trail that might as well be a neon sign to predatory noses. Human odour is particularly distinctive to carnivores. We have apocrine sweat glands that produce protein-rich secretions, quickly colonised by bacteria that create our signature smell. This scent cuts through the forest like a knife, unmistakable and attention-grabbing. Modern humans mask this with deodorants, soaps and synthetic scents. You have none of these luxuries. And that's just your baseline smell. Any blood, from injuries, menstruation or butchering prey, acts like a dinner bell to predators. The iron-rich scent of blood can travel for miles on cold winter air, drawing in every carnivore within range. A simple cut from making tools becomes a potential death sentence. A woman's monthly cycle becomes a terrifying vulnerability, not just for her but for her entire group. The food you prepare creates another layer of scent. Cook meat, and you might as well be sending formal invitations to a banquet with yourself as the potential second course. The smell of cooking fat travels astonishingly far in still winter air. Early humans developed specific strategies around cooking locations and timing to minimize this risk. You have no such knowledge. Even your waste creates danger. Human urine and feces have distinctive odors that immediately identify you as prey to many predators. In the modern world, sewage systems and bathrooms keep these scents contained. In the Stone Age, every time you relieve yourself, you're potentially marking yourself for death. Covering your tracks isn't just about disguising footprints, it's about minimizing your entire sensory footprint in an environment where being detected means being hunted. And you, with your scented soaps, perfumed laundry detergent, and a lifetime of olfactory obliviousness, have no idea how to move undetected through a predator's world. Even if you somehow mask your scent, territorial boundaries create invisible death traps across the landscape. Predators mark and defend specific hunting grounds, cross into a wolf pack's territory, and you've entered a danger zone without even knowing it. The same goes for big cats, bears, and other territorial species. There are no warning signs, no fences, just the sudden realization that you're being stalked, and by then it's usually too late. Let's be generous and assume you've recognized the predator threat and decided to prepare some defenses. Your first instinct might be weapons, something pointy to keep the sharp teeth at bay. But the crude spear you've managed to fashion from a stick and a poorly napped stone point is laughably inadequate against a charging predator. Consider the physics. Your spear might be 5 feet long with a stone point that can indeed puncture hide, but a charging cave bear or lion compresses that distance in a fraction of a second with enough momentum to impale itself on your spear and still reach you with claws and teeth. Unless your spear is braced against the ground at exactly the right angle, with the perfect amount of give to absorb impact without snapping, you've just irritated your attacker before it tears you apart. Bows and arrows, even if you'd somehow mastered the complex process of creating them, most predators don't politely stand still while you draw, aim and fire. Miss your first shot and you will, and there's no time for a second. Even a hit is unlikely to stop an adult predator immediately, unless you strike a vital organ. An astronomically unlikely shot for someone with no archery training. I'll just gather a group for protection, you might think, and you'd be partially right. Humans evolved to use numbers as a defensive strategy, but effective group defense requires coordination, practice, and mutual trust developed over years. It needs specific formations, communication systems, and unified responses. 10 strangers with pointy sticks aren't a defensive unit. They're a panicked, chaotic buffet line for predators who've evolved specifically to create confusion among prey groups. The truth is, even Stone Age humans with lifetimes of experience lost people to predators regularly. Archaeological evidence shows predator teeth marks on human bones, telling silent stories of hunts where humans weren't the hunters. The difference was that our ancestors accepted this reality and built their entire existence around mitigating it. They knew which areas to avoid at what times of day, which predators responded to which defensive displays, how to construct shelters specifically to exclude large carnivores, and how to move through landscapes while minimizing risk. You know none of this. Your understanding of predators comes from nature documentaries viewed from a couch, or sanitized zoo exhibits with safety glass between you and the actual danger. You've never smelled a predator's territorial marking and recognized the specific individual it belongs to. You've never learned to distinguish between casual animal movement and hunting behavior. You've never trained your ears to identify the subtle difference between wind in leaves and a stalking carnivore. There's a reason why tales of monstrous beasts pervade human mythology. Our ancestors weren't superstitious fools. They were documenting very real threats that ruled the night. The werewolf myth didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from the very real terror of wolf packs, hunting humans in winter when other food was scarce. The monster under the bed is just a domesticated echo of the predator outside the cave. Night falls again, and with it comes the howling. Closer this time. Your fire is dying, your strength depleted from constant vigilance. Every shadow seems to move, every sound carries threat. Your hand tightens around your pathetic spear, knowing it's an empty comfort. The modern human mind isn't wired for this kind of fear. The knowledge that you're being hunted, assessed, watched by ancient killing machines that see your species as just another source of calories. This is the reality our ancestors faced every night for hundreds of thousands of years. It shaped our behavior, our social structures, our settlement patterns, and even our sleep cycles. Modern humans have forgotten what it means to be prey. The predators haven't forgotten what it means to be predators. As your eyelids grow heavy, fighting against the exhaustion of constant fear, you might hear a twig snap nearby. Or was it just your imagination? The darkness is playing tricks again. But somewhere out there, yellow eyes are watching. Patient, hungry, waiting for the fire to die or for sleep to finally claim you. Because in the Stone Age, night belongs to the hunters, and you're not one of them. In the distance, a lone wolf howls and others answer. They are coordinating, communicating in a language written by evolution and perfected over millennia. They're discussing strategy, position, approach. They're talking about you, and unlike you, they know exactly what they're doing in this ancient, deadly game where the stakes are survival and the penalty is becoming a meal. Welcome to life as prey, the hunters are circling. You've somehow survived the bone-chilling cold, managed to find enough calories to keep your body functioning, and have successfully avoided becoming dinner for the massive predators stalking the frozen landscape. Congratulations, but don't get comfortable, because in the Stone Age, invisible killers lurk everywhere, and your body is their perfect playground. Let's talk infection, the silent assassin of the prehistoric world, that small cut on your hand. In the modern world, you'd clean it with soap, maybe add some antibiotic ointment, cover it with a bandage and forget about it by tomorrow. But 40,000 years ago, that same innocent cut is potentially your death warrant, signed in blood and sealed with dirt. Without antibiotics, without sterilization, without even the basic understanding of germ theory, every wound is an open invitation to bacteria. And they will come. They always do. The soil beneath your feet contains tetanus spores waiting to enter your bloodstream. The very air carries streptococcus and staphylococcus bacteria, ready to transform that minor scratch into an angry, red, pus-filled nightmare. The infection timeline is brutally efficient. Day 1, redness and swelling, nothing too concerning. Day 2, increased pain, maybe some heat radiating from the wound. Day 3, red streaks begin trailing up your arm or leg, the first sign that bacteria are invading your lymphatic system. By day 4 or 5, you're feverish, weak, confused. Your body is fighting a war it can't win. Without modern medicine, sepsis sets in. Your organs begin to fail one by one. By day 7, you're dead, all from a cut you might have gotten while sharpening a stone tool or gathering firewood. And that's if you're lucky enough to die quickly. Gangrene presents an even more horrific end. Your wounded tissue, deprived of blood flow and oxygen, begins to die. The flesh turns black, then green, then releases a smell so putrid it makes even hardened hunters vomit. The dead tissue continues to spread, and you're literally rotting alive. With no surgical intervention, no amputation capabilities, you'll spend your final days watching your own body decompose before your heart finally gives out. But perhaps the most insidious killer isn't from a visible wound at all, it's in your mouth. Those teeth you've taken for granted. In the Stone Age, dental problems aren't just painful, they're lethal. Without toothbrushes, without fluoride, without dental floss, your teeth are under constant assault from the food you eat. Cavities form, abscesses develop, the infection festers in your jaw, just inches from your brain. And then it spreads. The pathway from an infected tooth to your brain is terrifyingly short. The infection travels upward, through blood vessels or facial planes, until it reaches your cranial cavity. A brain abscess forms. You experience headaches at first, then confusion, then seizures. Within days, the pressure inside your skull becomes unbearable. You slip into a coma and die, all because of a toothache that modern dentistry could have fixed in 30 minutes. Broken bones present another deadly scenario. That simple fall you took while tracking game, the arm you fractured when you slipped on ice. In the modern world, you get an x-ray, a cast, maybe some pain medication, and within weeks, you'd be healing nicely. In the Stone Age, compound fractures, where the bone breaks through the skin, are nearly always fatal. The exposed bone becomes infected, osteomyelitis sets in, and the infection eventually reaches your bloodstream. Even simple closed fractures can heal improperly, leaving you permanently disabled, a death sentence in a world where physical ability equals survival. The most terrifying aspect, you can see these injuries happening. You understand cause and effect. But the real killers in the Stone Age are the ones you can't see, the parasites and microorganisms turning your body into their personal playground. Water, the very thing you need to survive, is also trying to kill you. That clear, cold stream looks refreshing, but it's teeming with microscopic assassins. Giardia, Cryptosporidium, various strains of E. coli. They're all waiting in that pristine-looking water. There's no boiling water before drinking in emergency situations. No water filters, no iodine tablets. Just you, your thirst, and a gamble with microorganisms that can cause devastating diarrhea, which in winter conditions means rapid dehydration and death. Even if you're careful about your water, parasites find other ways in. The meat from that rabbit you finally managed to catch? It's potentially loaded with trichinella worms, ready to insist in your muscles and cause excruciating pain. The fish from the frozen lake. Tapeworm larvae waiting to grow into foot-long parasites in your intestines, stealing your precious nutrients and causing malnutrition even if you're eating regularly. The soil itself harbours hookworm larvae that can penetrate your skin simply by walking barefoot. Once inside, they travel to your lungs, get coughed up and swallowed, then attach to your intestines, where they feed on your blood, causing anemia and weakness, the last things you need when trying to survive winter. And let's not forget the ectoparasites, lice, fleas, ticks, that see your body as prime real estate. Beyond the constant itching and discomfort, these tiny terrors are vectors for diseases like typhus, relapsing fever, and plague. Your animal hide clothing, your sleeping furs, your very body, all become breeding grounds for parasites that have been evolving alongside humans for millennia, perfecting their ability to use you as both home and food. The reality of Stone Age existence wasn't just about avoiding the obvious dangers, it was about surviving the invisible war being waged inside and on your body every single day. And this was normal, this was expected, this was life. Perhaps the most sobering evidence comes from archaeological finds, skeletal remains telling stories of immense suffering, bones showing signs of massive infection, skulls with holes drilled into them, evidence of trepanation, a desperate attempt to relieve pressure from brain infections or injuries, dental remains with abscesses so severe they created channels through the jawbone. These weren't rare occurrences, they were common. The death statistics are staggering. In most hunter-gatherer societies, including those of the Stone Age, infant mortality hovered around 40 to 50%. Nearly half of all children born never reached adulthood. For those who survived childhood, life expectancy rarely extended beyond 35 to 40 years, and that's an average skewed by the lucky few who managed to reach old age. Women faced additional risks. Childbirth, a natural process now made relatively safe by modern medicine, was a leading cause of death. Without sterile conditions, without surgical interventions, without even basic understanding of positioning and technique, women died from hemorrhage, infection, and exhaustion. Maternal mortality rates ranged from 10 to 20% per birth. And considering women might go through multiple pregnancies in their lifetime, the cumulative risk was enormous. Even if a mother survived childbirth, her infant faced daunting odds. Without understanding germ theory, without knowing how disease spreads, entire groups could be wiped out by what we now consider minor illnesses. A simple cold could develop into pneumonia. A minor skin infection could become systemic. Diarrheal diseases, now treatable with oral rehydration therapy, were often fatal, particularly for the young and elderly. When disease struck a Stone Age community, there was no containment, no quarantine procedures, no understanding of contagion. An infected individual would be cared for by family members who would then become infected themselves. The disease would spread through close quarters, through shared food and water, through simple proximity. An epidemic could reduce a thriving group to a handful of survivors in weeks. And what of medicine? What treatments existed for these deadly conditions? The answer is both fascinating and frightening. Stone Age humans weren't stupid. They observed, they learned. They developed treatments based on what seemed to work. Some plant-based remedies did contain compounds we now recognise as having legitimate medicinal properties. Willow bark contains salicin, similar to aspirin. Certain moulds do produce antibiotic substances. Various herbs can help with digestive issues or pain relief. But for every effective treatment, there were dozens that did nothing, or worse, caused additional harm. Without clinical trials, without scientific method, medicine was trial and error with deadly stakes. The person treating you might be a respected healer with generations of knowledge, or they might be making it up as they go along. Either way, their toolkit was severely limited. Surgical interventions existed but were primitive and excruciating. Trepanation, drilling holes in the skull to release evil spirits or relieve pressure, was performed on living patients using stone tools. Remarkably, evidence shows some people survived this procedure, with bone growth around the holes indicating healing occurred. But many others surely died from blood loss, infection, or brain damage. Broken bones might be set, but without x-rays, without proper casting materials, the results were inconsistent at best. Dislocations could sometimes be manipulated back into place. Wounds might be cauterized with hot stones or fire. painful but occasionally effective at stopping bleeding and burning away infectious agents. Amputation, removing a limb affected by gangrene or severe injury, was the ultimate last resort. Without anaesthesia beyond perhaps alcohol or narcotic plants, without sterile instruments, without blood transfusions, the procedure itself was often fatal. If the patient survived the shock and blood loss, infection would likely finish what the surgery began. The psychological impact of this medical reality can't be overstated. Imagine living in a world where a simple cut could mean death, where tooth pain wasn't just discomfort, but a ticking time bomb, where the sight of pus or red streaks on skin was essentially a death sentence. Every injury, every illness carried the weight of potential mortality. There was no calling 911, no emergency room, no antibiotics waiting at the pharmacy. This constant proximity to death shaped Stone Age psychology in ways modern humans can barely comprehend. It fostered fatalism alongside desperate innovation. It created complex spiritual beliefs around illness and healing. It made pain an expected companion rather than an unusual visitor. So as you huddle in your inadequate shelter, stomach growling with hunger, muscles aching from constant effort, remember, the greatest threats to your survival might be the ones you can't even see, that minor scrape on your elbow, that dull toothache, that persistent cough. In the Stone Age, any of these could be your final chapter. And the worst part, you'd never even understand what was killing you. Modern medicine isn't just a convenience. It's the difference between a cut being an inconvenience and a cut being a coffin. It's the line between a fever being a few uncomfortable days and a fever being the end of your existence. It's the gap between life and death, stretched from days to decades. So the next time you pop an antibiotic, the next time a dentist fixes your cavity, the next time a doctor sets your broken bone, remember what your Stone Age ancestors faced, and be very, very grateful you weren't born 40,000 years earlier. You've survived the bitter cold, somehow managed to avoid starvation, miraculously dodged the prehistoric predators, and by sheer luck you haven't died from infection or disease. Congratulations. But there's one threat you haven't fully reckoned with yet, and it's possibly the deadliest of all: other humans. While we love to romanticize ancient societies as harmonious, egalitarian communities where everyone shared resources and supported each other, archaeological evidence tells a much darker story. Stone Age humans weren't modern people in animal skins. They were shaped by brutal evolutionary pressures that rewarded survival at any cost. And in the harsh winter landscape of 40,000 years ago, other humans were simultaneously your greatest hope for survival and your most dangerous competition. Let's start with tribal politics, a game where the stakes were literally life and death. Stone Age groups weren't nations with defined borders and diplomatic relations. They were fluid, family-based bands with loosely defined territories that shifted with resource availability. That river valley with reliable fishing, that forest with abundant game, that cave system offering perfect shelter, everyone wanted them. And unlike modern property disputes settled in courtrooms, these conflicts were resolved with blood and bone. Archaeological sites tell the tale. Mass graves with skulls showing blunt force trauma, skeletons pierced with stone-tipped projectiles, evidence of scalping and trophy-taking. One famous site in Germany called Talheim contains 34 bodies, men, women and children, all killed in what appears to be a single violent event, likely a raid by a neighbouring group. This wasn't unusual, this was survival. When resources grew scarce in winter, these conflicts intensified. Your modern notions of sharing and fairness would evaporate the moment your children began to starve. Territorial boundaries, invisible lines known only through oral tradition, became matters of life and death. Cross into another group's hunting ground and you might never return. The archaeological record suggests up to 25% of adult males in some hunter-gatherer societies died violent deaths at the hands of other humans. That's a homicide rate that would make the most dangerous modern cities look peaceful by comparison. But what if you found a group willing to take you in? Surely then you'd be safe. Not quite. Because now you'd face the rigid hierarchy that governed Stone Age social life. Forget democratic decision-making or equal rights. Stone Age groups operated on dominance hierarchies that would make a corporate ladder look like a playground slide. At the top sat the strongest, most skilled or most cunning individuals, usually males in their prime physical years. They got first choice of food, shelter and mates. They made decisions that affected everyone. And they maintained their position through demonstrations of strength, strategic alliances, and sometimes brutal suppression of challenges. As a newcomer, especially one with no valuable skills or family connections within the group, you'd start at the absolute bottom of this hierarchy. You'd eat last, if at all. You get the worst sleeping spot, the most dangerous tasks, the least protection. In times of plenty, this might be survivable. In winter, when every calorie counted, being last in line often meant starvation. Gender roles weren't suggestions, they were ironclad survival strategies enforced through generations of tradition. Men typically hunted and defended territory. Women gathered plant foods, processed to materials, prepared meals, and cared for children. These weren't arbitrary divisions, but efficient allocations of physical capabilities in a world where specialization increased survival odds. Try to break these norms, and you wouldn't just face social disapproval, you would potentially endanger the entire group. For a modern person, especially one accustomed to choosing their own path in life, this rigid structure would feel suffocating. But protest it, and you'd quickly find yourself facing the Stone Age's brutal approach to conflict resolution. Modern society has courts, mediators, and complex legal systems to handle disagreements. Stone Age groups had direct, often physical confrontation. Disputes over resources, mates, or status were frequently settled through fighting. Not symbolic combat or regulated contests, but dangerous, potentially lethal struggles. Broken bones, crushed skulls, and damaged eye sockets and skeletal remains tell the story of societies where violence was a primary method of social control. For minor transgressions, punishment might be relatively mild, public shaming, temporary food restrictions, or assigned unpleasant tasks. But for serious offences, theft during lean times, sexual impropriety, or challenging leadership, the consequences could be severe. Beatings, mutilation, or exile were common. And exile wasn't just embarrassing. In winter conditions, being forced out of the group was essentially a death sentence, just delayed and more painful than direct execution. Even if you somehow navigated these dangerous social waters, you'd still face the primal pressures of reproductive competition. The drive to pass on genes didn't wait for comfortable circumstances. In small, isolated groups of 25 or 50 individuals, finding a mate wasn't just about companionship, it was about genetic survival. And humans, like all animals, competed fiercely for reproductive opportunities. For men, this often meant direct competition with other males, fighting for status, demonstrating hunting prowess, or establishing dominance. For women, it meant navigating complex social alliances and securing protection for themselves and their offspring. The stakes were existential. In small populations, failing to reproduce meant your genetic lineage simply ended. Your biological drive wouldn't politely wait for better conditions. It would push you towards the conflicts you might not be prepared to handle. Pregnancy brought its own social complications. A pregnant woman required additional calories and protection, becoming both more valuable to the group as the carrier of its future, and more vulnerable to threats. Archaeological evidence suggests pregnant women often received better food allocation, but also faced restrictions on their movements and activities. They became, in essence, communal investments that needed protecting. Once children arrived, the social dynamics grew even more complex. Child rearing wasn't just a parental responsibility, but a group effort, yet another social bond that could both protect and constrain you. Children were simultaneously precious resources for the group's future and dangerous liabilities during hard times. They required calories they couldn't yet provide, protection they couldn't reciprocate, and constant attention that diverted from immediate survival tasks. Cross-cultural evidence suggests infanticide was practiced in many ancient societies, particularly during extreme hardship. The bones tell the story: infants with no signs of disease or injury, carefully buried, but clearly not meant to survive. This wasn't done from cruelty, but desperate pragmatism. When resources couldn't support existing members, bringing new dependent lives into the group meant risking everyone's survival. The most disturbing evidence of social breakdown comes from sites showing clear signs of cannibalism. At Goeth's Cave in England, human bones from the Paleolithic period show systematic butchery marks identical to those found on animal bones, evidence of defleshing, marrow extraction, and skull processing to access the brain. Similar evidence appears at sites across Europe and beyond. This wasn't always starvation-driven. Some cannibalism appears ritualistic, perhaps consuming enemies to absorb their strength or as the ultimate dominance display. But in winter conditions, when game disappeared and stored foods ran out, archaeological evidence suggests some groups turned to their own dead, or created more dead, to survive. What makes these social threats particularly insidious is that humans evolved to be hypersocial creatures. We need others. Stone Age survival was virtually impossible alone, especially in winter. A single person couldn't maintain fire constantly, couldn't effectively hunt large game, couldn't watch for predators while sleeping. You needed a group, but that same group could turn on you the moment resources grew too scarce. The psychological burden of this social reality would crush most modern people. We're accustomed to social contracts that prohibit violence, institutions that mediate conflicts, and abundance that makes lethal competition unnecessary. Stone Age winter stripped away these comforts, revealing the raw, uncomfortable truth about human social dynamics when pushed to extremes. Trust itself became a limited resource. Archaeological evidence shows Stone Age groups were typically comprised of related individuals. Family bands where genetic ties created natural alliances. As an outsider, you'd face deep instinctive suspicion. Every missed hunt, every mistake, every unusual behavior would be scrutinized. Are you incompetent or deliberately sabotaging the group? Are you worth the calories you consume? These weren't philosophical questions, but practical calculations made daily. Language barriers would compound these issues. While we don't know exactly when human language developed, by 40,000 years ago, different groups likely spoke different dialects or languages entirely. Unable to communicate effectively, you'd struggle to defend yourself from accusations, explain your intentions, or build the social bonds necessary for acceptance. Every interaction would be fraught with misunderstanding and potential conflict. Cultural practices would present another minefield. Each group developed specific beliefs, taboos, and traditions that helped them navigate their environment. Violate these unknowingly, perhaps by handling food the wrong way, entering a space considered sacred, or failing to observe proper funerary practices, and you could trigger responses ranging from ostracism to violence. These weren't arbitrary rules, but survival strategies encoded in cultural memory, and groups took them deadly seriously. Even if you found temporary acceptance, your position would remain precarious. Social status in Stone Age groups wasn't fixed, but constantly renegotiated through contribution, alliance building, and demonstration of value. One failed hunt, one period of illness, one wrong word to the wrong person could send you tumbling down the social hierarchy, with potentially fatal consequences during the resource-scarce winter months. Your modern skills would be largely useless. Programming, marketing, financial analysis, even modern medical knowledge, none of these would translate to immediate survival value. You couldn't trade expertise for protection. The only currency that mattered was immediate practical contribution to group survival, food acquisition, shelter maintenance, tool production, threat defense. Without these skills, you'd be a liability rather than an asset. Perhaps most disorienting would be the moral flexibility that extreme circumstances bred. Stone Age ethics weren't about abstract principles, but practical outcomes. Actions we consider unthinkable, abandoning the elderly during migration, infanticide during famine, cannibalism in extreme conditions, became necessary choices when survival hung in the balance. Your modern moral framework would crumble under these pressures, leaving you psychologically adrift in a world where the unthinkable became routine. The archaeological record shows some groups did develop more egalitarian structures, more robust sharing practices, and more inclusive social systems, but these typically flourished in resource-rich environments where competition was less intense. Winter in the Ice Age pushed even the most cooperative groups toward darker survival strategies. This isn't to paint Stone Age humans as inherently brutal or immoral. They were people responding to extreme conditions with the tools evolution had given them. The same capacity for violence also enabled protection of kin. The same hierarchical structures that oppressed some also organized efficient collective action. The same tribalism that created conflict with outsiders also fostered deep cooperation within the group. But for you, a modern person suddenly thrust into this social reality, the adjustment would be virtually impossible. You'd lack the lifetime of enculturation that prepared others for these harsh social dynamics. You'd approach interactions with fundamentally different expectations about fairness, autonomy, and conflict resolution. You'd miss subtle social cues that everyone else read instinctively. In short, even if you somehow mastered fire, found food, avoided predators, and escaped disease, the social challenges of Stone Age winter would likely prove fatal. Not because ancient humans were monsters, but because survival demanded social adaptations that modern life has allowed us to forget. We've spent 12,000 years since the agricultural revolution deliberately building a world where these brutal choices are unnecessary, and in the process, we've lost the psychological calluses our ancestors developed through generations of harsh winters. So as you struggle through the bitter cold, gnawing out hunger, and constant danger of prehistoric winter, remember, your most complex challenge isn't the environment itself, but navigating the desperate social landscape it creates. The greatest predator has always been and remains your own kind. You've managed to navigate the killing cold, avoided starvation, somehow escaped becoming predator food, miraculously didn't die from infection, and have found a social group that hasn't immediately killed you. Impressive, but now you need to contribute to survive. You need tools. And the harsh reality, making effective Stone Age tools requires skills you don't have, materials you can't identify, and techniques that take years to master. Let's start with the most basic Stone Age technology, the stone tools themselves. That sharp knife you're imagining? That deadly spear tip? That efficient axe head? None of them exists in nature. Each must be created through a process called knapping, the controlled breaking of stone to produce sharp edges and specific shapes. And it's not just smashing rocks together until something useful happens. Knapping is a complex skill requiring hand-eye coordination, material knowledge, and muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of practice. Imagine trying to break a rock so precisely that it creates a perfect razor-thin edge, not just once by luck, but consistently, intentionally creating specific shapes for specific purposes. Modern experimental archaeologists spend years mastering these techniques, and even then, they produce more failed attempts than successful tools. The first challenge is simply finding the right stone. Not all rocks can be knapped effectively. You need materials with specific fracture properties: flint, chert, obsidian, quartzite. Can you identify these by sight? Do you know where to find them in a snow-covered landscape? Would you recognize a high-quality nodule versus one filled with flaws that will shatter unpredictably? Each region had its preferred materials, often traded over vast distances because quality mattered tremendously. Let's say you somehow find suitable stone. Now you need to master the techniques. The basic approach involves striking a core stone with a hammerstone to remove flakes, but the complexity lies in the details. The angle of the strike, the force applied, the follow-through, all must be precisely controlled. Too hard a blow shatters the core, too soft and nothing happens. Wrong angle, and you get unusable fragments instead of sharp flakes. More advanced techniques like pressure flaking, using antler or bone tools to press off small flakes for fine detail work, require even greater skill. The Clovis points and Solutrean blades that represent the pinnacle of Stone Age craftsmanship took generations of knowledge transmission to perfect. You, with your modern hands unaccustomed to this work, would likely spend weeks producing nothing but cuts on your fingers and frustration in your mind. Even if you somehow manage to create a basic cutting edge, stone tools require constant maintenance. They dull quickly, they break under pressure, they need resharpening, which demands the same refined skills as the initial creation. A single day of intense use might require multiple resharpening sessions, each one removing material and eventually requiring complete replacement. The archaeological record shows that Stone Age humans produced and discarded tools in massive quantities. A skilled knapper might create dozens of tools in preparation for a hunting trip, knowing many would fail in use. This wasn't planned obsolescence, it was the inherent limitation of the technology, and you, the novice, would go through tools at an even faster rate if you could produce them at all. But stone alone doesn't make a functional toolkit. Handles, bindings, and composite designs were essential for effective use. That stone blade needs to be attached to something: a wooden handle, an antler shaft, a bone base. This required mastery of a completely different set of skills. Hafting, the process of attaching stone tools to handles, involved natural adhesives like pine resin or birch tar, or sinew or plant fibre bindings, precise wood carving, and extensive knowledge of how different materials interact. Birch tar, for example, required a complex production process involving controlled burning of birch bark in oxygen-reduced conditions. Could you create this adhesive from scratch in winter with no modern tools or understanding of the chemistry involved? The wooden components presented their own challenges. You couldn't just snap a branch and call it a handle. Wood needed to be seasoned, straightened, shaped and smoothed, all using stone tools that you haven't yet managed to create effectively. Different woods had different properties: flexibility, strength, resistance to splitting. Do you know which trees produce the best spear shafts? Which ones resist rotting when exposed to moisture? Which ones can bend without breaking? This isn't just academic knowledge, it's survival information accumulated over thousands of generations. The Inuit recognized dozens of snow types, each with different properties for travel and shelter building. Aboriginal Australians could identify hundreds of plant species and their uses. Stone Age Europeans knew exactly which stones, woods, resins, and fibres combined to create the most effective tools for specific purposes. You, despite your smartphone and college education, likely can't identify 10 edible plants in your local environment, let alone the perfect materials for tool creation. Let's look at a specific example: creating a hunting weapon. A basic spear seems simple enough, right? Just a sharp point on a long stick. But effective spears were engineering marvels disguised as simple tools. The shaft needed precise balance, with weight distributed to maximize throwing power without sacrificing accuracy. The tip needed secure attachment that wouldn't fail on impact, but could be replaced when damaged. The wood itself needed to be straight, strong, and seasoned to prevent warping. More advanced hunting weapons like atlatls, spear throwers, or bows dramatically multiplied human hunting power, but with corresponding increases in complexity. An atlatl seems simple, a hooked stick that extends the throwing arm, but its effectiveness depends on precise length, balance, and handle ergonomics. Small variations in design significantly impact range and accuracy. After thousands of attempts, you might produce something functional, but by then winter will have long claimed your life. Bows represent an even higher technological achievement: complex, composite tools requiring intimate knowledge of wood properties, sinew backing, string materials, and the subtle art of tillering, balancing the limbs for even draw strength. Archaeological evidence suggests that crafting a single high-quality bow could take weeks or months of dedicated work by experienced bowyers. The remarkable Holmegard bows from Denmark, dating to around 9000 BCE, show sophisticated design elements including differentiated limb width, precise recurve profiles, and careful material selection that modern bowyers still struggle to replicate. Arrow making was its own specialised craft. Effective arrows need perfect straightness, precise weight distribution, appropriate flexibility, and aerodynamic fletching. Each component, shaft, point, nock, fletching, required specific materials and techniques. Native American fletchers would gather feathers from specific birds, split them precisely along the shaft, and attach them at exact angles using sinew bindings and natural adhesives. The complexity rivals modern engineering, all accomplished without measuring tools or standardized components. Even the simplest tool, fire, represents technological complexity beyond most modern humans' capabilities. We've discussed the challenges of friction firemaking, but maintaining and controlling fire demanded its own toolkit. Fire pans, tongs for moving embers, bellows for controlling airflow, fuel management techniques all developed through millennia of trial and error. Stone Age cooking technology was similarly sophisticated. Boiling water without metal containers? Stone Age people used direct fire boiling, heating rocks and dropping them into water containers made of bark, animal stomachs, or tightly woven baskets, or pit cooking methods that functioned like primitive pressure cookers. Each technique required specific tools, precise timing, and intimate knowledge of material properties. Clothing technology represented another area where Stone Age ingenuity outpaced modern intuition. Creating cold weather clothing involved multiple complex processes, from skinning animals without damaging the hide, to fleshing, scraping, tanning, smoking, and softening the leather. Bone needles, sinew thread, tailored designs with gussets for movement. Stone Age clothing wasn't crude animal skins draped over bodies, but sophisticated garments engineered for specific environments. The Inuit parka, with its layered construction, adjustable hood and precise fit, remains a model of cold weather engineering that modern designs still emulate. Creating such garments required specialised tools, scrapers with precisely shaped edges, awls for punching holes, burnishers for softening leather, specialised cutting implements for different materials. Each of these tools needed to be created, maintained, and replaced as they wore out. Food preservation technology, critical for winter survivors, involved both specialised knowledge and tools. Smoking racks, drying frames, storage pits lined with specific materials to prevent spoilage, fermentation vessels, rendering equipment for processing fat, all required construction using Stone Age materials and methods. The technology wasn't just physical tools, but timing knowledge, understanding exactly when to harvest, how long to smoke, what temperature ranges allowed proper drying without spoilage. The most sobering aspect of Stone Age technology is the interdependence of tools and skills. You need tools to make better tools. You need certain tools to create the materials needed for other tools. The technological system was a complex web of interdependent knowledge, not isolated techniques that could be easily reinvented. To create effective hunting weapons, you need cutting tools. To create good cutting tools, you need specialised pressure flakers. To create pressure flakers, you need tools to shape bone or antler. Each step requires materials prepared with other tools in a chicken and egg problem that Stone Age humans solved through generational knowledge accumulation, a luxury you don't have. The archaeological record shows this clearly. Major technological innovations, pressure flaking, bow construction, sophisticated clothing didn't appear suddenly as individual inventions, but emerged gradually through incremental improvements across generations. The Solitary points of France, representing some of the finest stone tool craftsmanship ever achieved, developed over hundreds of generations, each artisan adding small refinements to an evolving tradition. This isn't to diminish Stone Age technology, quite the opposite. What our ancestors achieved with limited materials represents some of humanity's most impressive innovation. Their technological systems were perfectly adapted to their environments, sustainable and repairable with locally available materials. Modern experimental archaeologists, despite all their background knowledge, still struggle to replicate the quality and efficiency of tools routinely produced by the Stone Age craftspeople. The point is that you, a modern human without this specific knowledge and skill base, would find yourself technologically helpless despite coming from a more advanced society. Your abstract understanding of physics or chemistry wouldn't translate to practical survival skills. Your ability to operate a smartphone wouldn't help you nap a stone blade or build an effective trap. Even if you intellectually understood what needed to be done, having watched survival shows or read books, the gap between knowledge and skill would prove fatal. Knowing that friction can create fire doesn't mean you can actually produce it when you're cold, hungry, and working with unfamiliar materials. Understanding that stone can be knapped doesn't translate to the ability to create a usable cutting edge. Stone Age technology wasn't primitive, it was highly specialised, requiring lifelong skill development and knowledge accumulation. What appears simple to modern eyes, a stone scraper, a wooden spear, a leather pouch, represented thousands of hours of practice and generations of knowledge refinement. It was technology perfectly adapted to its environment, but utterly inaccessible to those without the specific skills required to create and maintain it. So as you sit shivering in the Stone Age winter, looking at rocks and sticks and animal hides, the raw materials of survival, remember that turning them into the tools you need requires more than intelligence or determination. It requires specific skills developed through years of practice guided by knowledge accumulated across generations, and winter won't wait while you figure it out. Welcome to the world where weather isn't just an inconvenience, it's a ruthless killer with an endless arsenal. Forget checking your weather app. Forget grabbing an umbrella. In the Stone Age, nature's assault was relentless, unpredictable, and without mercy. Let's talk about why the elements themselves would be your most persistent enemy. You thought that snowstorm last year was bad? The one where you had to stay home and order delivery? In the Stone Age, blizzards didn't mean Netflix and chill. They meant potential extinction. When a blizzard hits in the Stone Age, it's not just snow, it's a white wall of death. Visibility drops to nothing. The howling wind drowns out every sound. That mammoth herd you were tracking? Gone. The path back to your shelter? Vanished. Your fire? Extinguished. And here's the brutal part. You can't just wait it out in your car. You're standing in it, your body about leaking away minute by minute, while your brain struggles to make sense of a world turned completely white. Disorientation sets in quickly. You make what you think is a straight line back to camp, but you're actually walking in circles. Each step drives you further from safety. Your tracks fill in behind you almost instantly. No GPS, no landmarks, just white death swirling around you. Studies of modern deaths in blizzards show that most victims are found less than a mile from safety. So close, yet so impossibly far when you can't see your hand in front of your face. But blizzards aren't the only weather weapon in winter's arsenal. Ice storms coat everything in a deadly glass-like shell. That tree branch you're counting on for support? It's now slick as polished marble. The ground beneath your feet, a skating rink designed by a sadist. The rocks you normally use as handholds. Impossible to grip. One fall, one broken ankle, and you're done. Not in a week, not in a day, within hours. And then there are the flash freeze events. You've ventured out on what seems like a mild winter day. The temperature feels almost comfortable. You've gone further than usual, tracking game or gathering whatever plants might still be available. Then the front moves in. There's no weather radar, no warning system. The temperature plummets 30 degrees in an hour. The sweat on your skin, which was keeping you cool, now becomes a conductor pulling heat from your body. Your damp clothing freezes against your skin. Your extremities go numb. Hypothermia sets in before you even realise what's happening. Wind chill isn't just a number on a weather report, it's a mathematical expression of how quickly you'll die. A 10 mph wind can make a 30-degree day feel like 21 degrees. A 30 mph wind makes it feel like 15 degrees. And in the Ice Age, with temperatures already 10 to 15 degrees colder than today, those numbers become even more lethal. The wind doesn't just feel colder, it physically strips the heat from your body, accelerating heat loss by sometimes 50%. Every exposed piece of skin becomes a radiator dumping your precious core temperature into the atmosphere. Remember too that weather isn't just a daytime phenomenon. At night, temperatures plummet further. The clear skies that might have given you a brief respite of sunshine during the day become a curse after dark, allowing all heat to escape into the blackness of space. There's no weather forecast warning you that tonight will be 20 degrees colder than last night. You just wake up, if you wake up at all, to find your world transformed into something even more hostile than it was when you closed your eyes. In the comfort of your heated home, you probably don't think much about water. It comes from the tap, clean and ready to drink. In the Stone Age winter, water becomes both essential and deadly, often simultaneously. Dehydration in winter is a silent killer. You might not feel thirsty when it's cold, but your body is losing moisture with every visible breath. That cloud you exhale, that's water leaving your body. The cold, dry air pulls moisture from your lungs, your skin, your eyes. And when you're dehydrated, your blood thickens, your circulation slows, your brain functions decline. Your judgment, already compromised by cold and hunger, deteriorates further. But getting water in winter is a dangerous game. Streams and lakes freeze over. Breaking through ice requires tools and strength you might not have, and then there's the risk of falling in. Immersion in icy water gives you perhaps 15 minutes of useful consciousness. Your muscles seize, your limbs stop responding. And even if you manage to pull yourself out, your wet clothing becomes a death sentence, unless you can get it off and find heat immediately. Snow seems like an obvious solution. It's frozen water, right? Just eat it. But here's the cruel trick. Eating snow actually accelerates hypothermia. Your body must use precious heat energy to melt the snow. For every mouthful of snow you consume, you're lowering your core temperature. The correct technique? Melting snow near a fire before drinking requires fire, containers, and time you might not have. The moisture challenge extends beyond drinking. Stream crossings become deadly gambles. Modern outdoor experts have a saying, wet feet, dead meat. In freezing temperatures, wet feet can develop frostbite within hours. The tissue dies. Gangrene sets in. There's no antibiotics, no surgeons, just the certainty of a painful death spreading upward from your blackened toes. Higher elevations offered Stone Age humans both advantages and deadly challenges. Caves in hills or mountains provided natural shelter, and elevated positions were easier to defend, but the mountains themselves were merciless killers. At higher altitudes, oxygen levels decrease. For every 1,000 feet of elevation, the oxygen content of air drops about 3%. Your brain, which consumes 20% of your body's oxygen, functions less efficiently. Decision-making suffers, coordination diminishes. The simplest tasks become exhausting. That crucial spear throw to bring down food? Your aim is off. The careful step across a narrow ledge? Your balance fails. The quick reaction needed to dodge a predator? Your muscles respond too slowly. Mountain weather changes with terrifying speed. A clear morning can become a killing storm by midday. Wind speeds increase dramatically with elevation. A 20-mile-per valley wind becomes a 60-mile-per howling force on ridgelines, strong enough to knock you from your feet and send you tumbling down slopes. And then there are avalanches, winter's most spectacular killers. A slab of snow the size of a football field breaks loose above you. It accelerates to 80 miles/hour within seconds. It weighs hundreds of tons. There's no outrunning it, no fighting it. It buries you under feet of concrete like snow, and if the impact doesn't kill you, suffocation will. Your body might not be found until the spring melt, if ever. Even without dramatic snowslides, the freeze-thaw cycle creates constant danger. Water seeps into rock cracks during the day, freezes and expands at night, gradually splitting boulders apart. The result? Rock falls that can crush your shelter or block your path without warning. The mountains themselves are constantly, imperceptibly moving, and each movement can be lethal. The most successful Stone Age winter survivors weren't those who adapted well to winter. They were those who prepared for it obsessively during the other seasons. Winter survival actually begins in spring. Food storage wasn't a hobby. It was a life or death calculation. Every calorie not consumed during times of plenty had to be preserved for the lean months. Meat needed to be dried in specific ways to prevent spoilage. Plant foods required careful processing to remain edible. Storage containers had to be protected from moisture, insects, rodents, and larger scavengers. One mistake, one poorly sealed container, and months of work could be lost overnight. Fuel gathering was equally critical. The dry, dead wood needed for efficient fires doesn't materialize in winter. It must be collected during warmer months, properly dried, and stored where snow and rain can't reach it. A single winter night without fire could be your last. A family of 5 might need several tons of wood to survive a winter, all gathered by hand, all carried to shelter, all properly stacked and protected. Shelter winterization wasn't just about comfort. Drafty gaps meant precious heat loss. Roofs that could handle summer rain might collapse under snow weight. Entrances needed to be positioned away from prevailing winds. Smoke ventilation had to balance between allowing toxic fumes to escape while minimizing heat loss. Every detail mattered. Every oversight could be fatal. Equipment maintenance couldn't wait until something broke. Stone tools dulled, bindings weakened, clothing wore thin at stress points. Each item had to be inspected, repaired, or replaced before winter made such work impossible. The bone needle that snapped while repairing a tear in your shelter covering. There's no quick replacement when the ground is frozen solid and the animals that might provide new bone material have migrated away. In the Stone Age, winter wasn't just a season to endure, it was an enemy to prepare for, a siege to outlast, a battle many didn't survive. The elements weren't just inconvenient, they were actively trying to kill you through 1,000 different mechanisms, and they had all the time in the world to succeed. Your modern understanding of weather as something to check on your phone before deciding whether to bring an umbrella wouldn't just be useless, it would be fatally inadequate. Because in the Stone Age, the elements weren't something you adapted to, they were something you fought against every moment, knowing they would never tire, never show mercy, and never stop trying new ways to end your brief existence on this hostile planet. The cold, the hunger, the predators, these are the physical threats of Stone Age winter that would kill most of us within days. But there's another killer, one that operates silently, invisibly eroding your greatest survival tool from within. Let's talk about your mind and how quickly it would shatter under the psychological weight of Stone Age survival. Modern humans live in a world of constant connection. Even when physically alone, your phone buzzes with notifications. Social media feeds you dopamine hits. Entertainment streams into your home 24/7. But in the Stone Age, isolation takes on a whole new meaning. Imagine being part of a small band, maybe 15, 25 people, huddled in a cave or primitive shelter as winter rages outside. The space is cramped, smoke-filled, and reeks of unwashed bodies. For days or even weeks during the worst weather, you might not venture more than a few feet from this spot. There are no books, no games beyond the simplest bone dice or stone markers, no music except what you create yourselves. Just the same faces, same voices, same stories, day after endless day. Or worse, imagine being separated from your group. Perhaps you were hunting when a storm hit, or gathering winter roots when darkness fell too quickly. Now you're alone, truly alone, in a way modern humans almost never experience. The silence is deafening, the darkness absolute. Your only company is the howling wind and your increasingly frantic thoughts. Studies of isolated Antarctic researchers, people with modern shelter, food security, and the knowledge that relief will eventually come, show significant psychological deterioration after just a few months. Depression, irritability, insomnia, and cognitive impairment become common. Now strip away all safety nets and extend that isolation indefinitely. Your mind doesn't just suffer, it begins to fracture. But isolation isn't the only psychological burden. There's the constant grinding stress of survival itself. Every decision carries potentially fatal consequences. Should you venture out today to check traps, or stay in the relative warmth of shelter? Should you eat your last preserved food now, or hope tomorrow brings hunting success? Should you use precious firewood to stay warm through the night, or conserve it for when temperatures drop even further? This is decision fatigue on a scale modern humans never face. It's not about which restaurant to choose or which Netflix show to watch. It's life or death choices, hour after hour, day after day, with incomplete information and devastating consequences for wrong answers. Your brain, overwhelmed by this constant stress, begins to shut down higher functions. Planning becomes difficult. Risk assessment grows erratic, impulse control weakens. And then there's the vigilance exhaustion. In the Stone Age, letting your guard down meant death. Every sound might be a predator, every shadow a threat. The constant alertness modern soldiers experience in combat zones, which leads to debilitating PTSD, was the default state for our ancestors. But whereas modern combat deployments last months, Stone Age winters lasted half the year. Your nervous system, flooded with stress hormones, eventually burns out. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes chronically overactivated. You startle at nothing, you can't relax, you can't truly sleep. Speaking of sleep, forget about your comfortable 8 hours. Stone Age sleep was fragmented, light, and constantly interrupted. Someone had to tend the fire, and someone had to listen for predators. Someone had to check on the children. Combined with cold, hunger, and anxiety, quality sleep becomes impossible, and sleep deprivation is a proven torture technique for good reason. After just a few days of poor sleep, hallucinations begin, paranoia grows, emotional regulation collapses. Microsleeps, seconds-long blackouts, occur randomly, sometimes during critical tasks. Your Stone Age mind, once your greatest evolutionary advantage, becomes a liability as winter grinds on. Modern humans rarely experience true darkness. Even at night, artificial light surrounds us, streetlights, device screens, the glow from windows. But Stone Age winter meant 14 to 16 hours of profound darkness, night after night for months. We now understand seasonal affective disorder as a recognised condition, affecting millions even with our artificial lighting and climate control. The lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms, decreases serotonin production, and increases melatonin. The result? Depression, lethargy, hopelessness, and suicidal ideation. Now amplify that effect tenfold. No light therapy boxes, no vitamin D supplements, no understanding that what you're experiencing has a biological basis. Just unrelenting darkness that seems to press in on your shelter and seep into your soul. Is it any wonder that winter festivals centering around light and fire became so critical across human cultures? These weren't just celebrations, they were psychological survival mechanisms. Archaeological evidence suggests suicide wasn't uncommon in prehistoric communities during harsh winters. Skeletal remains showing no signs of violence or disease, but deliberately positioned in ways suggesting self-destruction, tell a grim story. When hope vanishes and suffering becomes constant, the human mind can reach a breaking point. And in a world without psychiatrists, antidepressants, or even a basic understanding of mental health, that breaking point meant death. Group psychology offered little protection. In fact, close quarters and shared hardship often amplified psychological distress. What modern psychiatrists call mass psychogenic illness, the spread of symptoms through social contact, could sweep through Stone Age winter camps. One person's paranoia becomes contagious. One person's hallucinations spawn shared delusions. Before long, entire groups might be participating in irrational behaviours, driven by collective fear or desperate hope. This isn't speculation. Historical accounts from more recent isolated winter communities, Arctic explorers, pioneer settlements, trapped whaling crews, document the phenomenon vividly. The mind, already stressed beyond endurance, becomes suggestible. Reality blurs. And in the Stone Age, without any scientific framework to understand what was happening, these episodes would be interpreted through the lens of spirits, omens, and supernatural forces, adding another layer of terror to an already unbearable situation. The Stone Age mind deteriorated in winter for entirely physical reasons as well. Your brain, which consumes 20% of your body's energy despite being only 2% of your weight, is the first organ to suffer when calories become scarce. Malnutrition doesn't just weaken your body, it literally shrinks your brain. Studies of starvation's effects show alarming cognitive impacts. Problem-solving abilities plummet. Memory functions deteriorate. Concentration becomes impossible. Abstract thinking, the ability to plan, to innovate, to adapt, fades away. The malnourished brain, desperate to conserve energy, shuts down everything but the most basic survival functions. Specific nutrient deficiencies attack cognition from multiple angles. Lack of B vitamins impairs nervous system function. Iron deficiency reduces oxygen transport to brain tissues. Protein shortage prevents neurotransmitter production. Your brilliant modern mind, capable of understanding quantum physics or composing symphonies, is reduced to a primitive processing center focused on immediate threats and basic needs. Hypothermia accelerates this cognitive collapse. As your core temperature drops, your thinking becomes muddled. At 95 degrees, 35 degrees, confusion sets in. At 91 degrees, 33 degrees, rational decision-making becomes impossible. The cruel irony? You stop feeling cold. You might even feel suddenly warm and begin removing clothing. A phenomenon so common in freezing deaths, it has a name: paradoxical undressing. Your dying brain, no longer able to assess reality, makes the one decision guaranteed to kill you faster. Memory, your storehouse of survival knowledge, becomes unreliable. Did you remember to check that trap line? Did you count everyone in your group? Did you properly store those precious fire-starting materials? The information might still be in your brain somewhere, but accessing it becomes increasingly difficult as stress hormones interfere with retrieval processes. The survival techniques you've learned, the location of emergency food caches, the warning signs of weather changes, all might slip away when you need them most. Humans are social creatures. Our greatest strength has always been our ability to cooperate, to share knowledge, to solve problems collectively. But winter survival pushes social bonds to breaking points and beyond. Trust, the foundation of human cooperation, erodes quickly under survival pressure. Did someone take more than their share of food? Is that hunter hiding the meat from a successful kill? Is that group member feigning illness to avoid dangerous gathering tasks? Suspicion, once planted, grows like a cancer through Stone Age winter camps. The most disturbing transformation occurs in moral boundaries. Modern humans operate within complex ethical frameworks. We believe in fairness, compassion, self-sacrifice for the greater good. But push any group far enough into survival mode and watch those frameworks collapse. The historical record is clear and chilling. During the Donner Party tragedy, families who had been friends and travelling companions for months resorted to cannibalism. During Arctic expeditions, supplies meant for the entire group were stolen by individuals. During sieges throughout history, the old and weak were abandoned or worse. Stone Age winter didn't just test your physical endurance or your technical skills, it stripped away the comfortable illusions of civilization and forced impossible choices. Would you give your last food to a crying child who might not survive anyway? Would you abandon an injured group member who was slowing everyone down? Would you fight, perhaps to the death, over access to the warmest sleeping spot? Leadership structures, crucial for group survival, often collapsed under winter pressure. Authority maintained through physical dominance became tenuous when the strongest hunters failed to provide food. Decision-making by consensus broke down when factions formed around resource distribution. Communication deteriorated as stress, hunger, and cold made every interaction potentially explosive. The psychological horror of Stone Age winter wasn't just that you might lose your mind, it was that you might lose your humanity. The person who entered that winter shelter in autumn wouldn't be the same person who emerged in spring, if the one emerged at all. And for modern humans, accustomed to psychological safety and ethical certainty, this transformation would be the most shocking death of all, the death of who you thought you were. History books and documentaries often romanticize Stone Age survival as a heroic tale of spear-wielding hunters battling mammoths and cave bears, but there's another story that rarely gets told, the double burden carried by women during those brutal winter months. If surviving Stone Age winter was a nightmare for everyone, for women it was a special kind of hell, layered with biological challenges, social constraints and dangers that would make modern women recoil in horror. Let's start with the cold, brutal facts of biology. In an environment where physical strength often meant the difference between life and death, women's generally smaller frames and lower muscle mass created immediate survival disadvantages. The average Stone Age woman stood about 5.2 and weighed perhaps 110 pounds. That meant less insulating body mass, faster heat loss, and reduced capacity for the heavy labour of winter survival. But the true biological burden came from reproduction. Pregnancy during winter months was a potentially fatal condition. A pregnant woman's body demands additional calories, up to 300 extra per day in the final trimester. Where would those calories come from when the entire group was already on the edge of starvation? Her body would prioritise the developing fetus, leaching calcium from her bones, iron from her blood, leaving her progressively weaker as winter dragged on. The pregnant woman faced impossible thermodynamic challenges. Her expanded blood volume meant increased heat loss through her skin, yet she couldn't risk getting too cold. Hypothermia threatened both her life and her unborn child's. She needed more calories precisely when food was most scarce, more rest when work demands were highest, more protection when the group was least able to provide it. Then came childbirth, a process that today still kills over 300,000 women annually worldwide, despite modern medicine. In the Stone Age, the numbers were catastrophic. Archaeological evidence suggests maternal mortality rates between 25 to 50% per birth. Winter births were particularly deadly. Infections spread rapidly in closed, unsanitary shelters. Blood loss, difficult to control under the best circumstances, became more dangerous in cold conditions that already stressed the cardiovascular system. If mother and child survived birth, breastfeeding created new survival challenges. A nursing mother needs approximately 500 additional calories daily to produce adequate milk. Her body will make milk even at the expense of her own tissues, literally dissolving her from within to feed her child if external nutrition is inadequate. The stark choice: watch your infant starve or slowly destroy your own body trying to keep it alive. Then there's the menstrual cycle, a biological reality rarely discussed in survival contexts. Without modern sanitary products, menstruation created hygiene challenges, odour issues that could attract predators, and blood loss that depleted already scarce iron stores. In winter conditions, maintaining cleanliness during menstruation became nearly impossible. Cloth rags, if available, couldn't be properly washed in freezing conditions. Plant materials used as absorbents were scarce or non-existent. Modern studies of women in extreme conditions show that severe caloric restriction often halts menstruation, the body's way of preventing pregnancy when survival is already tenuous. This might seem advantageous, but it came with its own health costs, bone density loss, hormonal imbalances, and psychological impacts. The female body in winter wasn't just fighting the external environment, it was fighting itself. Stone Age survival depended on specialization. In most hunter-gatherer societies, this specialization fell along gender lines, not because of arbitrary social conventions, but because of ruthless survival economics. These divisions, which might seem restrictive or unfair by modern standards, were adaptive strategies that maximized group survival odds. Women were typically excluded from long-distance hunting, not due to capability, but due to reproductive value. In a small band where every life was precious, risking the individuals who could produce new group members on the most dangerous activities made no evolutionary sense. A community that sent women on high-mortality hunting expeditions would simply be outcompeted by groups that protected their reproductive potential. This created a bitter winter paradox. The highest calorie food sources, large game animals, were accessed primarily by male hunters, while women's traditional gathering activities yielded almost nothing during winter months. Plants were dormant or snow-covered, insects were hibernating, small animals were hidden or migrated. The skills that provided up to 70% of calories during warmer seasons became nearly useless when the snow fell. Yet women's work didn't decrease in winter, it intensified. While men might spend days tracking and hunting, women maintained the shelter, tended the all-important fire, processed any food that was available, cared for children and the elderly, manufactured and repaired essential tools and clothing, and prepared hides and sinews from any successful hunts. This work never ended, and unlike the occasional triumph of a successful hunt, it received little social recognition or status. The most demanding role was childcare. In the confines of a winter shelter, children required constant attention, not just for their immediate needs, but to prevent fatal accidents. A toddler who touched the fire, consumed poisonous materials, or wandered outside even briefly might not survive. This vigilance had to be maintained 24 hours a day, often while performing other essential tasks, and with no concept of time off or shared parenting responsibilities as we understand them today. The darkest aspect of women's Stone Age winter experience was vulnerability to violence. Archaeological evidence and anthropological studies of remaining hunter-gatherer groups paint a grim picture. In resource-scarce conditions, sexual violence increased dramatically. Women's smaller size and their need to remain near children made effective self-defense difficult. The close quarters of winter shelters meant no privacy and few opportunities to escape aggressive males. The protection paradox emerged from this reality. A woman needed male protection to survive, from external threats from other group members, and for access to hunting-derived nutrition. But this very dependence created vulnerability to exploitation. The power imbalance was nearly absolute. A woman who resisted sexual demands might find herself receiving smaller food portions, given inadequate sleeping space, or having her children neglected during resource distribution. Winter amplified these dynamics to extreme levels. As food became scarce and survival margins narrowed, a woman's options contracted dramatically. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia shows increased skeletal trauma in female remains from winter occupation layers, suggesting that violence against women escalated during these desperate months. Widowhood during winter was particularly devastating. A woman who lost her male partner faced immediate status reduction and resource access challenges. Unless quickly claimed by another male, she and her children might be systematically excluded from the most critical survival necessities. Some archaeological sites show evidence of probable widow caches, burials of women and young children who apparently died during winter months shortly after adult male deaths in the same group. For the modern woman accustomed to legal protection, economic independence and bodily autonomy, the Stone Age winter would represent an almost unimaginable regression. Her survival would depend not just on skills and strength, but on navigating a social minefield where her value was determined primarily by her reproductive capacity and her relationships with male protectors. The true horror of the women's burden in Stone Age winter wasn't just the biological challenges or the unending work. It was the complete vulnerability, knowing that despite your essential contributions to group survival, your individual worth remained conditional, your safety temporary, and your autonomy non-existent. In the harshest months, when the difference between life and death often came down to who received an extra handful of food or the warmest sleeping position, being female meant starting every day's survival calculation at a deficit. You've somehow managed to survive the brutal cold, constant hunger and predator attacks of your first Stone Age winter. Congratulations. But here's a sobering thought. If you'd been born into this world rather than time-travelled here, you probably wouldn't have made it past your 5th birthday. Children in the Stone Age weren't precious treasures to be protected at all costs. They were survival liabilities, extra mouths to feed, and tragically, often expendable. Let's start with the numbers, because they're staggering. Based on skeletal remains from Paleolithic sites, approximately 50% of all children died before reaching adulthood. Half, not from rare diseases or freak accidents, but from the everyday reality of Stone Age existence. Every mother who gave birth understood that flipping a coin would give you roughly the same odds of whether that child would survive to reproductive age. And this wasn't just sad, it was expected. Disease swept through Stone Age children like wildfire through dry grass. Without antibiotics, vaccines, or even basic germ theory, their underdeveloped immune systems were defenseless against pathogenic invaders. A minor cough could develop into pneumonia within days. Intestinal parasites picked up from contaminated water or raw meat would slowly drain nutrients from their growing bodies. Even something as simple as an infected cut could lead to blood poisoning and death within a week. Imagine your child developing a high fever in the middle of winter, their small body burning with infection while you helplessly apply damp cloths to their forehead. There are no antibiotics, no fever reducers, not even a thermometer to track their temperature. You'd watch their breathing grow more laboured, their skin mottle, and eventually, after hours or days of suffering, they'd slip away while you watched, powerless. Beyond disease, children faced a world designed to kill them through sheer accident. There were no baby gates, no childproof containers, no safety standards whatsoever. A toddler could toddle straight into an open fire pit, fall from a cliff edge, or wander away from camp and become predator food before anyone noticed they were missing. Stone Age sites frequently contained small skeletons with cranial fractures, crushed limbs, and evidence of animal tooth marks, silent testimonies to lives cut brutally short. But perhaps most disturbing to modern sensibilities was the practice of abandonment. When resources grew scarce during particularly harsh winters, tribes sometimes made the devastating calculation that some must die so others might live. Infants and younger children, especially those showing signs of weakness, illness, or deformity, were sometimes left behind during tribal migrations or placed outside the shelter during the coldest nights. It wasn't cruelty in their eyes, it was brutal pragmatism. The group couldn't afford to expend precious calories on those least likely to survive anyway. Archaeological evidence from caves in France and Spain shows clusters of small remains, sometimes separated from adult burial sites, suggesting intentional abandonment or sacrifice during periods of extreme hardship. These weren't monsters, they were humans making impossible choices when starvation threatened everyone. Even for the children who survived, growth itself was a punishing process. Malnutrition wasn't occasional, it was the default state. Winter meant severely restricted calories precisely when growing bodies needed them most. This resulted in stunted growth, with skeletal remains showing telltale signs of interrupted development, growth arrest lines in long bones that mark periods of near starvation. Children's teeth tell an even more detailed story. Enamel hypoplasia, visible lines and pits in tooth enamel, record each winter of severe nutritional stress like growth rings in a tree. Examination of Stone Age children's teeth shows these stress lines appearing with a clock-like regularity every winter, showing how their bodies essentially paused growth during the lean months, diverting all resources to simple survival. Work wasn't something that began in adolescence, it started as soon as a child could walk. By age 4 or 5, children were expected to contribute meaningfully to group survival. They gathered kindling, cleaned hides, fetched water, and minded younger siblings. A child who couldn't or wouldn't work became a luxury few groups could afford to carry. There were no participation trophies in the Stone Age, only the harsh reality that contribution meant survival. Learning itself was a dangerous process. Children learned to knap flint by watching and doing, inevitably slicing their fingers open repeatedly as they developed the skill. They learned which plants were safe by watching adults and sometimes through deadly trial and error. They learned hunting by accompanying adults on increasingly dangerous expeditions, where a single mistake could mean a goring from a wounded animal or a fall from a cliff. For orphans, the situation was even more precarious. Parental death was common. Hunting accidents, childbirth complications, disease, and tribal warfare regularly left children without protectors. Unlike our modern assumption that orphans would automatically be adopted by the community, Stone Age groups often couldn't afford the luxury of raising children not their own. An orphaned child had to prove their worth immediately and continuously. They needed to be old enough to work, smart enough to learn quickly, and resilient enough to survive with minimal care. Archaeological evidence suggests orphans often received less food and poorer shelter than children with parents to protect them. Some sites show child remains with signs of malnutrition, buried separately from the main group, possible evidence of orphans who weren't fully integrated into tribal protection. By age 12, Stone Age children weren't children anymore. They were fully functioning adults in miniature bodies. Girls were often already mothers, having begun childbearing shortly after their first menstruation. Boys were expected to hunt, fight, and provide as full members of the group. The concept of adolescence, that gradual, protected transition to adulthood, simply didn't exist. You were a child, then you were a contributor, with the shift happening brutally early by our standards. The cruel irony? Despite all this hardship, despite the deaths and the suffering, these children were the lucky ones. They were the survivors who passed their genes to the next generation. Every human alive today descends from Stone Age children who somehow made it through winter after brutal winter. So the next time you buckle your child safely into a car seat, schedule their vaccination appointment, or simply watch them sleep peacefully in a heated room, take a moment to appreciate how extraordinarily fortunate they are. Because in the Stone Age, childhood wasn't protected innocence. It was a gauntlet of suffering that most didn't survive. Think the weather is unpredictable now? Imagine living through the climatic roller coaster that was the late Pleistocene. That's right, the Ice Age wasn't just one long, stable, cold period. It was a climate system on steroids, prone to wild swings that could transform entire continents within a single human lifetime. And you thought adjusting your thermostat was challenging. The most terrifying aspect of Ice Age climate wasn't the cold itself, it was the speed of change. Modern climate scientists have extracted ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica that tell a shocking story. Temperature shifts of 10 to 15 degrees Celsius didn't take centuries to unfold. They sometimes happened within decades. Imagine the climate of Montreal suddenly transforming into northern Siberia within the span of time it takes to raise a child. No warning, no preparation, just an abrupt plunge into deeper cold that never retreats. These rapid climate shifts, known as Danskar Ushger events, occurred roughly every 1/500 years during the Ice Age. They weren't gentle transitions, they were climate system heart attacks. Tree ring data and sediment cores show vegetation zones moving hundreds of miles in just a few generations. Animals that had adapted to specific conditions suddenly found themselves in hostile environments. And humans? We were along for the ride, scrambling to adjust survival strategies that suddenly became obsolete. When these cold snaps hit, glacier advancement wasn't some distant gradual process. Ice sheets moved like slow-motion tsunamis, advancing up to a half-mile per year in some regions. Valleys that had been habitable hunting grounds for generations could have become buried under hundreds of feet of ice within a human lifetime. Imagine explaining to your children why the cave where you were born is now entombed in a glacier unreachable and forgotten. Sea level changes were equally dramatic. During warmer intervals, melting ice could raise sea levels by several feet per century. Coastal settlements, often the most resource-rich environments, would slowly drown, forcing migrations inland and triggering territorial conflicts with existing groups. Archaeological evidence from the Black Sea and Mediterranean shows numerous Stone Age settlements now submerged underwater, silent testimony to communities displaced by the rising tides. More devastating were the ecosystem collapses that accompanied these shifts. The carefully balanced food webs that humans relied upon didn't just change, they disintegrated. A forest that produced reliable nuts and supported game animals could transform into tundra within a generation. Fish migration patterns that had been predictable for centuries could vanish overnight. The mammoth herds that had sustained your tribe for 10 generations could simply disappear, moving hundreds of miles away seeking vegetation that no longer grew in your territory. But if rapid cooling wasn't enough to worry about, Stone Age humans also faced an even more terrifying climate phenomenon: volcanic winters. Supervolcano eruptions like Toba, approximately 4,000 years ago, ejected so much ash into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked globally for years. Not weeks, not months, years. Imagine 6 summers in a row where the sun is just a dim glow behind permanent grey skies, where crops fail to ripen, where temperatures remain below freezing even in July. These volcanic winters didn't just make life uncomfortable, they made it nearly impossible. Ice core evidence shows global temperature drops of 3 to 5 degrees for years following major eruptions. Tree ring data reveals periods where trees barely grew at all, indicating growing seasons so short and cold that plants essentially hibernated. For Stone Age humans dependent on plant foods and the animals that ate them, these were apocalyptic events. Even the rain turned against you during these periods. Volcanic ash in the atmosphere created acid rain that poisoned water sources and damaged plant life. The sulfur compounds from eruptions formed sulfuric acid in the atmosphere, raining down on the crops, wildlife and water supplies. Each rainfall became a toxic shower, burning skin, contaminating drinking water and killing off the plants that humans and animals relied upon. The most dramatic climate shock of all came around 12 to 900 years ago with the onset of the Younger Dryas, a sudden return to near glacial conditions after the world had been warming for thousands of years. Imagine this: after generations of gradual warming, where your ancestors had adapted to a milder climate by changing hunting patterns and shelter designs, temperatures plummeted by nearly 15 degrees within a single decade. Summer snow became common, forests died off, lakes froze year-round. This 1-300-year deep freeze may have been triggered by a comet impact or massive meltwater pulse from North American ice sheets, but the cause mattered little to those living through it. What mattered was survival, and the archaeological record shows many didn't make it. Human populations crashed globally, with evidence of abandoned settlements, nutritional stress markers in bones, and genetic bottlenecks that still echo in our DNA today. The Younger Dryas forced mass migrations as entire continents became essentially uninhabitable. Northern Europe, previously warming and increasingly forested, reverted to tundra. Animals and plants that humans had relied upon retreated southward or died off entirely. Stone Age tools from this period show a desperate shift toward hunting smaller game and processing more marginal plant foods, the archaeological equivalent of scraping the bottom of the barrel. Even evolution couldn't keep pace with these changes. Natural selection typically works over thousands of generations, gradually adapting species to changing conditions. But when conditions changed within a single generation, genetic adaptation was impossible. Only behavioral adaptation, rapid cultural evolution offered any hope of survival. Groups that could quickly abandon traditional hunting grounds, learn new food processing techniques, or develop better cold weather technologies survived. Those that clung to traditional ways perished. The archaeological record speaks volumes about these climate catastrophes. We find layers of human occupation in caves and rock shelters that suddenly go silent, with no signs of habitation for centuries. We find mass burial sites dating to periods of known climate instability. We find evidence of desperate dietary changes, tool marks on bones of species not typically eaten, processing tools for bitter, marginally edible plants, and in some cases even evidence of cannibalism during the worst climate-induced famines. What's perhaps most sobering is that many of these climate shifts occurred during periods of relative stability compared to what we face now. The Younger Dryas, dramatic as it was, occurred in a world with intact ecosystems, megafauna that had evolved with the climate system for millions of years, and human populations measured in thousands rather than billions. So while we worry about our modern climate crisis, and we absolutely should above it, take a moment to appreciate those Stone Age ancestors who somehow survived climate catastrophes we can barely imagine. They endured volcanic winters without understanding why the sun had dimmed. They survived as entire ecosystems collapsed around them. They watched sea levels drown coastal settlements without knowing why the waters rose. And somehow through it all, they kept the flame of humanity alive, passing knowledge, genes and technology to the next generation. Because when it comes to climate survival, Stone Age humans were the ultimate masters, not because they controlled the climate, but because they adapted faster than anyone thought possible. In a world of catastrophic change, flexibility wasn't just beneficial, it was the only thing that kept our species alive. We've talked about the brutal reality of Stone Age winters, the cold, the hunger, the predators, the social nightmares. But don't just take my word for it, because unlike written history, which can be embellished or forgotten, the physical evidence left behind tells a story that's impossible to ignore. The bones don't lie, and what they reveal about Stone Age winter survival is darker than anything I've described so far. Let's start with the human remains themselves. Stone Age skeletons read like roadmaps of suffering. Trauma marks appear on bones with shocking frequency, not random injuries, but patterns that tell specific stories. Defensive fractures on forearms show desperate attempts to ward off blows. Depressed skull fractures reveal violent conflicts that ended lives. Tooth marks from large predators, wolves, bears, big cats, appear on rib cages and limbs, showing who sometimes won the battle for survival. When archaeologists examine Stone Age remains from winter occupation layers, they find something particularly disturbing. Healed fractures are rare. Why? Because winter injuries were often fatal. A broken leg in summer might heal. That same break in winter when mobility meant survival was essentially a death sentence. Malnutrition signs are etched into nearly every skeleton. Dental enamel hypoplasia, horizontal lines on teeth that form during periods of severe nutritional stress, appear with clock-like regularity, marking winter after winter of near starvation. Harris lines in long bones show where growth completely stopped during the harshest months, resuming only when food became available again. Bone density analysis reveals severe calcium deficiencies, making Stone Age adults prone to fractures we'd normally associate with elderly osteoporosis patients today. Disease indicators are equally telling. Periosteal reactions, inflammatory responses visible on bone surfaces, show chronic infections that simmered for years. Sinusitis, visible as pitting inside nasal cavities, resulted from smoky fires in poorly ventilated shelters. Tuberculosis, parasitic infections, and fungal diseases all left their signatures on bones and teeth, revealing immune systems constantly under siege. Life expectancy tells perhaps the starkest story. Based on skeletal analysis from dozens of Paleolithic sites across Europe and Asia, the average Stone Age human lived just 25-30 years. This wasn't because they aged faster, it was because they encountered lethal conditions earlier and more frequently. Those who reached 40 were the exceptional survivors, revered elders who had somehow navigated decades of winter gauntlets that killed most of their peers. Burial practices speak volumes about how Stone Age people viewed death, particularly winter death. Mass graves dating to winter months show periods of catastrophic mortality, where groups lost multiple members simultaneously to starvation, disease, or extreme cold. These weren't careful ritualized burials, but hasty interments of bodies in frozen ground, emergency responses to death outpacing a group's ability to properly honor their dead. Some burials tell more personal stories. At Sungir in Russia, archaeologists found the grave of 2 adolescents and a child, buried head-to-head in winter garments adorned with thousands of ivory beads, a labour investment representing many months of work. This wasn't just grief, it was determination that these young lives, ended during winter, would be remembered. The ivory beads, spears and pendants buried with them represented a staggering investment of resources during a time of scarcity, showing how deeply these deaths wounded the community. What people thought they needed for the afterlife reveals much about what they feared in life. Wintered graves often contained fire-making tools, extra clothing, food implements and weapons, the very things that meant survival during the coldest months. The afterlife, it seems, was imagined to have its own winters to endure. Perhaps most disturbing are the remains that show evidence of cannibalism. At sites like Gif's Cave in England and Brillenhöhle in Germany, human bones from winter occupation layers show systematic butchery marks identical to those on animal bones, cut marks near joints, marrow extraction from long bones, and in some cases, even evidence of cooking. These weren't ritual practices. They were acts of desperation during periods when winter starvation pushed groups beyond all normal social boundaries. Cave excavations tell the story of repeated winter tragedy. At sites like Abri Pataud in France, archaeologists find dense occupation layers from winters, with hearths built atop hearths as people clustered desperately around fire for warmth. These layers often show declining tool quality over time, as hypothermia and malnutrition made precise napping increasingly difficult. The tools become cruder, the food remains more marginal, and then sometimes the occupation layer simply ends, a silent testament to a group that didn't survive until spring. Refuse analysis from winter layers reveals how desperate diet became. Bones of small, low-value prey, rodents, small birds, even down carnivores normally avoided as food, appear in increasing numbers. Plant processing tools show residues from bitter roots and bark. Emergency foods eaten only when nothing better remained. Charred seeds of plants known to be toxic unless processed extensively reveal knowledge born of desperation. People eating things they knew were dangerous because the starvation was the greater threat. The archaeological evidence doesn't just support the narrative of Stone Age winter hardship, it deepens it, revealing suffering more profound than written descriptions could capture. The bones don't exaggerate, they don't forget, they simply preserve the truth. Winter was a merciless killer, and survival was never guaranteed. After our journey through the frozen hell of Stone Age winter, the killing cold, the relentless hunger, the lurking predators, the social collapse, you might be wondering how humanity survived at all. Why didn't we just die out during one particularly brutal winter 30,000 years ago? The answer is both humbling and inspiring because, against all odds, some of our ancestors made it. And their survival secrets are written in your DNA, your culture, and your technology. Let's talk genetics first. Every person alive today is descended from Stone Age survivors, the ones who didn't freeze, didn't starve, didn't get eaten, and managed to reproduce. You carry genetic adaptations that helped your ancestors endure winter after merciless winter. Some populations developed more cold-efficient metabolisms. Others evolved specific fat distribution patterns that conserved core heat. Some gained genetic mutations that allowed them to digest starch more efficiently or synthesize vitamin D despite limited sunlight. These biological advantages weren't evenly distributed. The archaeological record shows certain groups thrived while others vanished completely. Genetic bottlenecks, periods where human populations crashed to dangerously low numbers, appear repeatedly in our DNA, evidence of winters so severe they nearly wiped us out. Your existence today means your particular ancestry thread somehow wove through every one of those bottlenecks intact. But genetics alone couldn't save us. Cultural evolution, the passing of knowledge from generation to generation, proved even more critical than biological adaptation. Stone Age humans didn't just survive, they remembered how they survived and taught others. This knowledge transfer, this accumulation of survival wisdom became our species' superpower. Unlike other animals that relied primarily on instinct, humans developed complex, teachable strategies. How to predict weather by watching cloud patterns, which trees yielded the best fire-making materials, how to track animals through snow, which plant roots remained edible in deep winter. These weren't genetic instincts, they were hard-won lessons, often paid for with lives, passed down through generations and refined over thousands of years. Group cooperation became our greatest survival tool. The archaeological record shows conclusively that loners died while tribes survived. Winter shelters frequently show evidence of multiple family groups clustering together, sharing resources, dividing labour, and creating social safety nets. The human capacity for trust and sacrifice we had born for putting group survival above individual gain didn't just happen by accident. It was ruthlessly selected for by winter after winter of brutal natural selection. When isolated individuals hoarded food, they might survive one winter but would find themselves without allies the next. When groups shared resources, even during scarcity, they maintained the social bonds that ensured long-term survival. Evidence from burial sites shows Stone Age groups often cared for elderly or disabled members who couldn't directly contribute to hunting or gathering, a sign that they recognized the value of wisdom and social cohesion over mere physical productivity. Technological progress, while glacially slow by modern standards, provided the final piece of the survival puzzle. Each generation added small improvements to essential tools, better spear points, more water-resistant shelters, more efficient fire-starting techniques. These incremental changes accumulated over thousands of years, gradually transforming human winter survival from miraculous to merely challenging. Now look around your home. That thermostat on the wall, it represents the culmination of 40,000 years of human struggle against cold. Your refrigerator, keeping food fresh for weeks, it solves a problem that killed countless Stone Age humans. Your medicine cabinet, with its antibiotics and pain relievers, it contains magic that Stone Age shamans could only dream about. The infrastructure we take for granted, electricity, running water, insulated homes, represents the greatest triumph over winter in human history. For the first time in our species' existence, winter has been reduced from an existential threat to a mere inconvenience, at least for those fortunate enough to live in developed regions. But this miracle of winter survival comes with responsibility. Our ancestors paid for our comfort with their suffering, their ingenuity, and often their lives. Every time you complain about a minor winter inconvenience, a late flight, a dead car battery, a temporary power outage, remember that you're experiencing nothing remotely comparable to what your Stone Age ancestors endured as routine. Climate change threatens to disrupt the comfortable bubble we've built around ourselves. As weather patterns grow more extreme and less predictable, some of the old lessons about survival and adaptation become relevant again. Our ancient ancestors knew something we're at risk of forgetting: that harmony with natural cycles isn't optional, and that preparation isn't paranoia, it's survival. So no, you wouldn't survive your first Stone Age winter. Neither would I. We've lost the hardiness, the skills, and the mental fortitude that our ancestors developed through generations of struggle. But we carry their legacy in our biology, our social structures, and our technological innovations. The next time winter winds howl outside your window, take a moment to appreciate the miracle of your warm home. Light a candle not just for illumination, but as a small tribute to ancestors who kept their own flames burning through the darkest, coldest nights of human existence. Because every human alive today descends from winter survivors, the ones who endured, adapted, and passed life forward, one brutal season at a time.